All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
When the biggest weapon in your arsenal is vulnerability, you just can't go around being okay, can you? HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. Over the last few months, we've been discussing a political outlook I've labeled the victim identity cult. To recap, that refers to an ideological dedication to adopting victim as the defining characteristic of one's identity, or one's entire identity itself. Expression of this victimhood and agitation for social and legal changes to accommodate the presumed victim class at the expense of others becomes a way of life, to the degree that the victim identitarian cannot imagine how to exist beyond the struggle against the disadvantages attributed to said victimhood. The growth of this cult has put its subscribers into a bit of a conundrum. How does one maintain a victim identity when one is not, in fact, a victim? Answer: you make stuff up. A factitious disorder, as explained by the Cleveland Clinic's website, is a mental disorder in which a person deliberately creates or exaggerates symptoms of an illness out of a need to be seen as ill or injured. Also known as Munchausen's disease, factitious disorder is considered a mental illness because it is associated with severe emotional difficulties and stressful situations. What if the emotional difficulty or stress is caused by cognitive dissonance between one's victim identity and recognition of how one's everyday life experience contradicts it? One of the most troubling characteristics the victim identity cult has developed is a tendency to fetishize psychological damage. It's basically a phenomenon of simultaneously glorifying the state of being a broken person while using it as an anti-accountability shield. This manifests among social justice ideologues in self-diagnosis with complex, rare, or disabling mental health conditions. Spend a few hours in the wrong part of Tumblr scrolling through blog posts about headmates and mood disorders, and you might develop the impression that mental health conditions are fashion accessories. Talk politics with certain Twitter trolls, and you could almost be convinced that there's no difference between the normal effects of everyday stressors and war-related trauma. There most certainly is, of course. Does that mean that milder experiences of stress do not matter? That they are no cause for concern? Of course not. But neither are they comparable, nor should they be considered crippling simply because they cause anxiety. Everybody experiences anxiety. Not everyone's anxiety constitutes a mental illness or a handicap. I grew up around Vietnam veterans with bad memories that influenced their mannerisms. It wasn't something they necessarily talked about. In fact, quite the opposite. But it wasn't something you didn't notice, either. It could be seen in how carefully they position themselves in public or social settings, not out of anxiety or anticipation of impending attack, but a now natural tendency to always be alert to potential vulnerabilities, to the degree that it was almost an unconscious, involuntary behavior. Their version of relaxed was simply much more mindful of their surroundings, much more prepared to react, than that of a civilian. It's a permanent psychological change, not necessarily a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, but still a result of surviving a traumatic experience. I've also seen the manifestation of severe PTSD in combat vets affect their social choices because of the potential for crowd behavior or other surprises to trigger an episode of hypervigilance or a full-blown panic attack. It is significantly different from the normal effects of everyday stressors, even though everyday stressors can be triggering for someone with the disorder. Does that mean that other people's mental health conditions are never real? That nobody with a diagnosis deserves compassion? Of course it doesn't. However, the legitimacy and implications of professional diagnoses cannot legitimize symptom fabrication for sympathy. Victim identity cultists, fetishizing brokenness to feel special, will claim to suffer from things like multiple personality disorder or severe post-traumatic stress disorder, but their symptoms seem to manifest only at the sufferer's convenience. They'll vomit up undocumented, unprovable experiences of traumatic crime victimization whenever they need a social bludgeon or a battering ram to force a conversation to go their way. They'll use demands for accommodation of dysfunctional quirks as a means of displaying their unique specialness to the world. They'll cite self-diagnosed addiction as an explanation or excuse for reprehensible behavior in which they have engaged. In the victim identity cult, you can't be one of the cool kids unless something is very, terribly, horribly, awfully wrong with you, resulting in your need for at least something within your social environment to be adjusted to suit your fragility or your eccentricity. In fact, failure to possess some manner of handicapping idiosyncrasy constitutes in and of itself a flaw. After all, how can you get people to do what you want if you're just fine? This can also be seen as part of the toxic masculinity narrative, wherein feminists pathologize men's competence, confidence, and ambition, as well as their tendency to prioritize action over expression when handling adversity, as evidence of socially imposed rules that force them to suppress their feelings and mistreat others. Male feminists use another aspect of the toxic masculinity narrative as an excuse when they do rotten things. Assigning male gender to toxic or dysfunctional traits that are not gendered in nature, and then presuming behaviors associated with them to be out of the transgressor's control. It's a devil made me do it type of response. They are quick to adopt the supposed pathology of toxic masculinity as their combination original sin and mental sickness, claiming to have to fight it every day as one might struggle with symptoms of a mood disorder. In this way, being afflicted with and obligated to resist their so-called toxic masculinity becomes a way of feeling special, a combination of the devil makes me do bad things with the devil is the coolest thing ever. It's awesome, in fact, because without it, there could be no men in the cult. It's the only victim identity they can have that isn't mitigated by their other original sin, male privilege. That narrative allows the cultist to simultaneously look and feel special as a resistor of his own original sin, yet superior in his condemnation of other men for being similarly afflicted. It can be used by feminist women as a kind of social equivalent to a choke chain with which they can yank a man into compliance with the expectations feminist ideology lays out for him. The cult's exploitation of brokenness as a prop to maintain the victim identity and control the dialogue makes them ill-equipped to handle debate with rational people who demonstrate and value resilience and reject fragility. Such people cannot be manipulated via the tools of the victim identity toolbox. Hardy individuals cannot be intimidated into following the ideology of the cult because they know the claims used as supporting evidence for the victim identity are not true. They reject fear-mongering diatribes on why they should adopt it as their own, and respond with arguments against it in a language that is alien to its proponents, that of logic, reason, self-reliance, and personal accountability. It can be fascinating to watch such conversations because broken victim identitarians do not know what to do with this. Their formula is signal maladjustment, receive coddling, exploit. If no coddling is forthcoming, they have no other next step. They often take to that like Smeagol to a length of elven rope. One might even say that it drives them crazy.
But now that I see him, I do pity him.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 75, Political Purgatory, Prison of the Victim Identity Cult. And Hannah's malfunctioning computer. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with the lovely and intelligent Anna Cherry, she who must be obeyed, Karen Strawn, nonsense annihilator Lauren B., and that adorable specter of death who's back for this stream, Prim Reaper, to analyze another victim cult phenomenon. But first, as usual, we got a couple of things to go over, like the fact that if you haven't already, you need to head on over to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications if you want to know what the Badgers have going on every day. If you want to support our work, even in the midst of all the financial blacklisting that is taking place today, feedthebadger.com is the most stable way to help out. So remember, information is power and we have it. Go to Badgerfeed for information, Feed the Badger to support us in sharing information. And speaking of sharing information, don't forget to smash that like button and share us on every social media site you use. Now that would be excellent. And now, to break down the social justice phenomenon of breaking down. Reality is far too scary. It's no wonder victim cultists want to spend their lives in a padded room, their own version of the childhood pillow fort. Well, badgers are coming for your safe spaces. Are you triggered yet?
It's almost like, you see the people on Tumblr starting up their little blogs, and they've got all of these rainbows of these on their profiles, like they're playing a messed up game of Pokemon, trying to collect them all.
I have to say that yes, that's exactly correct. They want to collect mental illnesses, mental disorders as prizes, right? Gets them places. Sorry, I'm putting things in the oven, but but it's like, okay, so I have a guy who is he's got an orphan disease. And it makes his life really inconvenient. And in particular, it makes eating out and traveling really inconvenient because he has an extremely restricted diet. The list of foods he can have is shorter than the list of foods he can't have. And if he has the wrong food, he goes into anaphylaxis and then he's in the hospital. So this is not something that he proudly wears as a badge. It's actually something that he tries as much as he can to work around. He's highly embarrassed when he's invited to parties and he can't eat the catered food or whatever, right? Or if he has to go to a conference and there's catered meals and he can't eat any of that stuff. He's very, very embarrassed by the fact that he cannot fit in with the regular people. And I'm like, there is no need for you to be embarrassed about it.
You can't cure that. It's one of those things that just frustrates me so bad, but like I understand, but it happens all the time with men. They get embarrassed about human things, any kind of difficulty, any kind of emotionality, anything. They just yeah, and I don't know if it's something that is intrinsic or is societal. At this point, I feel like I might just go so far back in our primitive brain that
a little column B.
Well, and plus, there's also the thing too, where people who are really struggling with disorders or, like things like PTSD, like war veterans, things like that, they often, they don't want to talk about these issues. They're usually
ashamed.
Well, they don't like to bring them up, right? They're uncomfortable things.
And they certainly don't want to brag about them. Oh my goodness.
Exactly.
I have an anxiety disorder and therefore I should be taking social policy.
Yeah, totally. Like my
fundamental.
My husband's great grandfather is a war veteran, and he doesn't like to talk about his experiences there, not because he's ashamed of it, but because these were traumatic things that he experienced. But you see the people talking about having like PTSD these days for the littlest things, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that some of them have legitimate PTSD. Like if people have been actually sexually assaulted, of course that's very traumatizing. But you see a lot of people talking about PTSD these days that maybe probably don't actually have it.
Melody Helmsley, Melody Helmsley, she said that she got PTSD from Twitter, from memes, right?
Yeah, and you can really tell the difference. difference in people who have it and people who don't have it, and the fact that the people who probably actually have it, they don't like to talk about it because, newsflash, these things are triggering to them.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between like a mental disorder and a physical disorder, right? Because a physical disorder is something you can do something about it, not in every case, but mental disorder, you have to take accountability for it, and only you can fix your mental situation. So just the thought of someone wanting to gain victim points for this problem that they have, I don't understand how you think that's a good thing. I mean, if you have these problems, great. I have all the empathy and sympathy in the world for you if you're doing something about it. But when
that's the thing. Yeah, I fundamentally disagree that they have to fix it themselves if they have a mental problem. A lot of times there are issues that require outside help in terms of tools, cognitive behavior therapy, talk therapy, whatever it is that helps a person. There's a big divide there that we're talking about two things a little bit. On one hand, we have the ways in which men heal versus women heal. So that will be different. Men generally do not heal through talking, while women do somewhat, more often anyway, get help through speech.
I think that men heal by talking in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Because my dad grew up, he was like between 8 and 12 years old when the Germans were occupying Denmark, right? And so he was on rations, and his father refused to operate his business because he wasn't going to fix any Nazi vehicles, because he was the only his dad owned a car dealership and mechanics garage, right? And his dad wasn't going to repair any Nazi vehicles, right? But my dad, when he talks about those times, primarily he talks. Oh, shut up, dog! Primarily, he talks about the times that he got one over on the Nazi soldiers. Right? He talks about the time where he snuck in here, he snuck in there, he stole this, he put a tack on somebody's chair, something like that. He talks about all of the ways that he was able to get one over on this massively oppressive occupying force that killed one of his family members. So he's essentially, when he talks about those things, he talks about, here's how well I survived that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all of that. Not here's how victimized I was.
No, exactly. That absolutely brings me to the other point.
How well he survived. He doesn't brag about how much he was victimized.
Right. And that's the fundamental difference, I believe, rather than talking about it or not talking about it, because sometimes that'll be different between men and women, or different types of people who have had support growing up versus those who didn't, when they weren't heard no matter what they said. So they just learned to shut up, so that'll be a difference. However, what you really need to look at is who do they hold responsible for the environment around them? Because people who suffer through actual disorders, PTSD in particular, as we're mentioning here, and of course I have a wealth of studies to show that feigning symptoms can absolutely lead to them, to the point where it was asked to be put in the DSM-5 that feigning symptoms should be classified as a type of a fictitious disorder, should be a type of subtype of somatoform disorder. So they actually wanted it to be a real disorder, because so many people do feign, self-diagnose, etc., and then believe what they feign. There's a lot of stuff there on that. But backing up to PTSD in particular, who do you hold responsible for your situation? As a lot of times people with actual trauma or actual issues, they will try their hardest to do everything they can to put off feeling bad and to structure the world around them in the way that they can manage it. They will do they put the responsibility on themselves in a certain way. They take, I would say, personal responsibility, as much of a dog whistle as that is, but they do. They try their best to make the world livable around them by changing themselves and changing their way of thinking. However, when you have people who do it as a bludgeon, as a hammer to hit others over the head with, to make them behave in the way they want, to control others, that's when they say, I have this X disorder, therefore you must control yourself. You have a responsibility to me. This outside world, this outside person, whoever outside of me has a responsibility to change themselves in every single way, while I change myself in no way. And that's not right. You have to change yourself somewhat. You have to try to be introspective and reflective and see what needs you have, and then try to communicate it to people, not as the first thing you say when you meet them, be like, call me by my pronouns. You, as you go through, you may want to gently tell people, hey, these things kind of make it difficult for me. So either you will help me not feel bad about this in some way, or we just can't hang out anymore. But they will not continue using it as something to punish others and to hurt them. And that's how you can tell a difference. Those who use it to control others versus those who say, hey, I have a genuine need. You can honor it or not, but hey, this is my need. And once again, even on that point, we live in the world that, especially in the West, especially for women, it is so cushy and soft and wonderful. And we definitely become the princess and the pea. And as someone who is a mental health professional, as well as recovering histrionic, I have both sides. I can empathize with where they're coming from. And I know that you feel the tiniest infraction is actually emotionally triggering. You can feel like the whole world is against you because you went on Twitter and literally everybody's dogpiling you. And you're like, oh my God, the whole world's against me. It's like, yeah, but you're thinking irrationally. You're using one single instance of one isolated group of people that is a vocal minority in your life, as opposed to all the people that are rallying behind you, as opposed to all the actual support you do get. But there's this hyper focus on the whatever preference of choice. And because of that, they legitimately feel triggered. They do feel bad. But do they have a right to? Is it healthy? Is it actually damaging? Is it actually doing anything to legitimately hurt them? Or is it a self-inflicted pain? And I think because we have not dealt with difficulties, especially emotionally overcoming anything, and feminism has a huge role to play in that, because it tells people that all you have to do is demand things of others instead of in any way trying to take the hit and keep getting hit and keep getting back up. Because guess what? That's what guys do every single fucking goddamn day. And they are more emotionally resilient, not just because of testosterone, which, yes, also plays a good part in it. So things like working out, things like being active and eating healthy, that will actually help you develop mental resilience as well. But the problem is, a lot of times we have these little computer chair potatoes, that, keyboard warriors that don't really go out. They don't work on their mental health or physical health. And often people use a mental disorder as an excuse instead of a reason. We actually briefly talked about that in our Discord, where somebody brought up like, hey, look, this person's having a manic episode. It doesn't excuse what they did, but they're having a manic episode. They are not controlling themselves. They're being compulsive. And somebody's like, oh, don't use their mental illness as an excuse. It's like, no, they're still doing something wrong. But you have to understand that sometimes people just literally can't help themselves. So, what do you do there? Like we have developed a situation where people are allowed to feign or to believe themselves into having a disorder. And then people look at it and go like, oh, well, nothing can be done. That's it. They have a disorder. Bye. Like what happened to the entire mental health profession? We have, I guess, multi-billion-dollar industry that actually helps people. But does it though? And now we're back to the whole psychology conversation of, do therapists actually help, or do they just continue feeding into the issue? And it's really hard to parse out because we have both types. We have genuine victims, and then we have people that are squeaky wheels. And so we pay all the attention to those who self-diagnose and then believe that they have a disorder and give themselves the disorder by nobody stopping them. But how do you differentiate between a faker and somebody who really has an issue? And that's just something that I don't even know where to begin.
Oh, well, if somebody's proud of their mental illness, I'd say...
Yeah, that's the point.
that, like, you don't have to be ashamed of your mental illness, right? Just like you don't have to be ashamed of having had an abortion. But I think that there's a line to be drawn between not feeling ashamed about having an abortion and shouting your abortion on Twitter. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
There's like a massive difference there, right? Like my guy, he makes self-deprecating jokes when it comes up, right? When people offer him food and he's like, oh, I can't have it, and then he's like, well, looking like me, because he's this big big, broad-shouldered, burly, Viking-looking guy. He's like a Cossack. And he's working with a bunch of little rabbit-like engineers, right? And because he's an engineer as well, right? So he doesn't fit in, and he's like, oh, I felt like I had to do something to fit in with the nerd crowd, right? So I figured, some kind of fucking food thing that makes me only able to eat tap water and fresh air would be just perfect for that, right? So, like he figures out a way to be lighthearted about it, to not act ashamed about it, all of those things, but he's not proud of it, right? But when people, and also when I would say that when people start to dictate, right, how society should be, right? So essentially you have the most sensitive individuals on Twitter dictating, and probably the most mentally ill individuals on Twitter having the most power. I mean, like, this is one of the things too, right? Because whether gender dysphoria is a mental illness or not, or whether transgenderism is just like a thing, right, that occurs, whether you agree with that or not, there's a whole bunch of comorbid disorders that go along with that: anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, all kinds of other issues, other mental issues that are comorbid with gender dysphoria, right? So you're looking at a situation where somebody can threaten me with death and their account will not get acted upon if I report them, right? But somebody misgenders me. Somebody asks, some feminist, in fact, asks, why are you pretending to be a girl? And I said, did you just misgender me? And then I reported her on a lark. On a lark. I thought, like, okay, nothing's going to come of this if I report this, right? No, within 7 hours, Twitter had notified me that her account was locked, and it would remain locked until she took the appropriate action. And I'm like, okay, so where the fuck are we? Right? I literally read a blog post, like, oh God, it was like years ago, where this woman, and she's listing off all of her disorders. She's anorexic, she's bulimic, she has anxiety, she has dissociative personality disorder, she's got borderline personality disorder, she's got got paranoid tendencies and all of this stuff. And then after she lists all of these off, she goes on then to explain how she should be the one who decides what social mores are in place. She who decides what civil discourse is. She who decides what speech should be legal and illegal. She who decides what should be, and people like her, right? What should be against the law and what should not be against the law, right?
God.
And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? You're essentially like saying, like, the most dysfunctional people in our society should be the ones who run it. Like, what? Like that was what she was saying, and she said it like with, it seemed like a perfectly. This was not The Onion, people.
Oh God, terrifying, right?
Perfectly straight face. And more and more and more, what we're seeing is that that's turning out to be the case, right? Like you see this whole thing with I don't know if everybody here is on up to speed with the rapid onset gender dysphoria thing, right? But this is a new phenomenon. It's only been sort of noticed over the last 4 years, maybe. Parents are saying, here's my daughter. She's always been on the autism spectrum and never had a problem with her gender identity until she made a trans friend at school or joined the LGBT Alliance Club or stumbled across some videos of some kid who was transitioning, doing a video diary of their transition, right? And then all of a sudden they're coming, this girl is coming up to me, my daughter is coming up to me and saying, I'm trans, I want puberty blockers, I want cross-sex hormones, I want a sex change. right? At
That's
age
that
13.
leads entirely into our idea that quick fix is all about that, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to fix their problems with an outside surgery, and it's never that easy. It never
Yeah.
is.
Well, you look at it. Okay, I'm willing to acknowledge that there may be some people, like some tiny percentage
Oh,
of
of
people,
course.
who have something that went wrong during their fetal development, right, in terms of their brain structure, and they really genuinely feel like they are the opposite sex, and they have all their lives. Fine.
But oftentimes even that doesn't help, though. There's so many people who've gone through surgeries and then they look down at themselves and they're like, I wish I just lived in the body that I was given with the brain type that I had, you know?
Agreed. But at least for them, I can say, okay, when you're an adult, you can make your own decision. But now we have in Canada, we have medical guidance to family doctors. And the reason it's to family doctors is because in the last 10 years, the waiting list for gender clinics has increased tenfold, right? So since 2007, between 2007 and 2017, the waiting list of transgender youth looking for treatment at gender clinics, right, with gender specialists has increased tenfold, right? So this has all of the hallmarks of a social contagion, all of the fucking hallmarks of a social contagion, right? Some kind of like, oh, psychosomatic, oh, I think I have Lyme disease because, like on The Simpsons, was it Lyme disease? No, maybe it was lupus. She's like, oh, was it all in my head? No, it was psychosomatic, right? So essentially, I don't know if you guys are going to get that reference, but the teacher, not Mrs. Krabappel, though. But essentially what you have is the situation where we have guidance coming down to family doctors to take an affirming stance, an affirming approach to transgender youth who say they declare themselves to be transgender in the office, right? Not a neutral stance, an affirming stance, right? And then to not be afraid to prescribe puberty blockers, which are, I can understand why. I can understand that's like there are arguments for and against puberty blockers. I disagree with them, but I can understand where people who want them are coming from, right? But not only that, the guidance says that since these kids will feel socially isolated by not going through puberty at the same age as their peers, family doctors, not gender specialists, family doctors in Canada should consider giving cross-sex hormone therapy that permanently changes the body, right, as early as age 13.
That's
That's what
terrifying.
we've got. That's what we've got here. And I'm thinking, what's it going to fucking take? 10 years from now, like 100,000 lawsuits, right?
Yeah,
Against
no kidding.
parents and doctors. Doctor, why did you prescribe me this thing, right? When I was ill and needed help, not needed to be like freaking indulged in my neurosis and my problems. And parents, you wouldn't even let me stay out to the, like past 9 o'clock at that age. You wouldn't let me make my own nutritional choices. I wasn't old enough to drive a car, wasn't old enough to vote, wasn't old enough to vote, to give my life for my country. Why did you think I was old enough to make this permanent, life-altering, irreversible decision?
Well, no kidding. It's ridiculous. And it's a massive thing to be prescribing. And people are talking about it so flippantly. It's like, this can dictate so many different things. And like, not to mention it can dictate like your fertility. It can dictate so much about your life. Like there's just,
if you change your mind after you
Yeah.
did, if you're one of these rapid onset gender dysphoria girls and you change your mind at age 18 after doing cross-sex hormone therapy, right, your voice is permanently lowered, you have a permanent Adam's apple, your shoulders are going to be broader, your jaw is going to be squarer, you're going to have a hard time passing as a woman as a biological female.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh my God. And I mean,
to undo a lot of that.
yeah,
Even if you don't have surgery, what the fuck?
Well, and they talk about it like it's no big deal, or that the parents who don't let their kids go through with it, like there was that whole thing. I should probably look into that more, but there was that whole thing where they were talking about children being taken away from their parents who didn't facilitate that, and it's like, are you actually serious about that stuff?
If you do not affirm your child's gender identity, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to put them on hormones and stuff like that, but your children can go to the doctor and get that without your knowledge, just so you know. Just like they can go, your 13-year-old can go and get an abortion without your knowledge, and the doctor has no right to inform you of that. But okay, so on these specific issues relating to sex, sexuality, reproduction, you have no right as a parent in Canada to know what's going on with your child. You have no right to know that they're on birth control, right? If they go to the doctor and request it, by themselves, right? So you have no right to know any of this and be informed of any of this, right? And then on top of that, if you, but you don't, you are not compelled by the government or by social services to arrange for this type of therapy for your child. You just have to affirm their gender identity. And I'm sorry, but like I am responsible for my children. If I thought one of my kids was 100% sincere, they'd been presenting in this way since age 3 or 4, right? And but I think back to my childhood, right? I was a tree climbing, knee skinning, salamander catching, guy friend wrestling, knock the apple.
Karen, I still feel it's weird I have a vagina, all right? I understand. Like, I can relate to that. You just don't feel, I mean, I know you don't, but like, in other words, being a tomboy myself and being on the autistic spectrum, I could have been one of those girls that was like, oh, hey, I made a trans friend. Now I want to, transition because I do have issues. I don't get along with certain groups of people that I want to get along with. It must be the fault of my penis.
Yeah.
No, it's literally, it's like, essentially, I have to wonder, right? Like when I was 8 years old, my parents bought me a Lego space Lego set that was the best Christmas present ever in the history of the world. That probably cost them the equivalent of $600 in adjusted dollars, right? And we were not rich, right? But they got it for me because I wanted it. And that year, they also put Nerf rockets in the stockings, and then we woke them up by launching Nerf rockets at them in bed. Anyways, so like I was this tomboy. I was a boyish girl, and if somebody had come up to me at age 6, age 7, right, and said, "Do you ever wonder if maybe you're actually a boy?"
Oh my goodness. My dad always took pleasure in telling me that I was supposed to be his little boy. Like they were expecting me to be a boy. That's what they thought they were having.
Me too.
My name was supposed to be Blake. My dad would refuse to put me in anything that I actually wanted to do growing up. And he's no, you got to be in sports. You're gonna play baseball. You're gonna play bowling. You're gonna be my little sports star that I was supposed to have. And like the whole growing up thing, I spent most of my time with other boys. Like it's, maybe that's a sign. Maybe that's why we're all here together talking about this. Maybe there's something about that.
Not treated with kid gloves because we weren't raised as girls.
Uh-oh. Anna, you're robotic. But like what they did when I expressed interest around age 8, maybe 9, because I made friends with a very feminine girl. And then I got pulled into this clique of girls that I stayed in for about 2 weeks before the girl that I was friends with got like dumped out of there. And then I went with her. But I wanted a Barbie styling head. One of those you can do the makeup and you can do the hair and all of that, right? And my parents got it for me, and then just sat unused, right? Like they didn't impose any kind of things on me. I knew my friend Lori, when I was in grade 3, would want perfume rather than a baseball for her birthday party, for a birthday present, right? I knew those things. and I fit in okay, right? I didn't fit in exactly the way the other girls did, but I fit in okay. Most of my friends that I spent any amount of time with were guys, but it wasn't because my parents were like, we were hoping for a son. No. And they didn't raise me any differently than they raised my older two sisters, which was, if you want to hold the flashlight while I tinker with the carburetor, you're welcome to. Or my mom saying, well, if you want to learn how to bake bread, here's, I'll help you do that. So essentially it was just like, it was just my temperament, my way of being. My parents just went along with it, right? But they never asked me, do you ever think maybe you're a boy? And, so I never felt uncomfortable with the fact that I could be all of the things that I was and still be a girl.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot to it that people are kind of oversimplifying, and I think it kind of goes back to a lot of the whole, we're treating mental disorders like personality traits. Like when people are behaving like they're behaving a little bit more masculine, they're more of a tomboy, instead of being like, oh, that's just a personality quirk that you have. They're saying, oh my gosh, that might be your actual gender identity. And I mean, it kind of also fits in too with just going back to kind of what we were talking about, like all of these disorders that people are talking about, they often do treat these sorts of things like personality disorders. And that's why, well, at least that's kind of a theory that I have, that's the kind of difference between the people who, those who are actually diagnosed by a mental health professional and who then take steps to try and fix those disorders versus those who self-diagnose and then who just talk about them as like social limiters, or they use them as excuses for why they can or can't do certain things, or why they're held back so much in life. And it just kind of drives me nuts that so many people are facilitating this kind of thing, because it's very damaging to one's mental health, rather than challenging it and saying, no, like if you think that this is something that you have, you should go talk to a professional about it. And until you do that, maybe stop assuming that you have all of these problems, because it's causing you to behave in ways that are not facilitating your positive mental well-being.
Agreed. I'm sorry. Like,
there we go. End thread.
We just had like, oh my God. We just had a major kerfuffle because someone came in the door.
Oh.
And my dog, the bad dog, Kevin. That's the bad one. Yeah. Super bad. That's her. Hear her.
Of course. We always can.
Oh my God. She was very excited. We got rid of the carpets in here thinking that would like make her not run around, because she would wipe out all the time. And it hasn't worked.
As we can tell.
I think she actually has borderline personality disorder. Like,
oh, there we go.
Every cat has borderline personality disorder, but it's a rare dog that has it, and our dog has it in spades. She's that iconic book, right? I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, about BPD. Kevin, get the fuck out of there. Oh my God. That book, it's like, for her, it would be, I hate you, I'd bite your face, don't leave.
Well, hopefully she'll get properly diagnosed by a canine mental health specialist, so that way she's not just self-diagnosed.
But she could always self-diagnose. But even when diagnosed by other professionals, I got some really awesome stuff here where even something like simulating amnesia under direction of a psychologist. Obviously, it's an experiment, but you go in there and they direct you to forget or deliberately forget something in a mock trial. And then later they bring you back in for recall. And guess what? You don't remember the thing you decided to forget.
Well, that was kind of like the study that there was a study that Hannah was kind of talking about here, and it was titled "The Residual Effect of Feigning How."
Symptoms,
feigning symptoms, and how they will evolve into a less conscious form of symptom reporting.
Oh yeah, 57% completely didn't realize that they were faking it. And of course, there's even beyond that. They're called Elizabeth Loftus did a Pluto behaving badly, false beliefs and their consequences, where people were led to believe that Pluto, they had a negative experience in Disneyland involving Pluto character that like he licked their ear and made them feel uncomfortable. And then they believed it by basically wanting to not pay for a Pluto souvenir as much as others. And like in general, didn't like Pluto as much after that. And even beyond, it's great. I have so many links. But
there are tons of studies exactly like that too, right? Where people have been like implanted memories and things like that. Where they've been
absolutely.
told...
Loftus is a badass rock star when it comes to that. That's her whole.
Work. She's badass because she's like, okay, well, why don't we use it for good? Like, why not implant a memory in your 15-year-old child that broccoli was one of his favorite foods growing up, right?
Oh, love it.
Yeah.
And it goes even actually beyond that. Not only do we misremember things based on what we decided or what we feigned. Well, so basically feigning specifically leads to believing that you have it and not noticing the mismatch. But there's another one too. Not only do we easily believe things that we decided, it's like hypnosis. Hypnosis doesn't work unless you want to be hypnotized. You have to be a willing participant. You have to suspend your disbelief. You have to go along with it. You have to be agreeable. So people are agreeable when they're trying to self-diagnose because they're looking for a problem and they, jump at anything. We have this in America, an expression for it, but in Russia too, we have an expression called a third year syndrome or whatever. When in medical school in third year, you learn all the things, all the syndromes and all the symptoms. And so everybody self-diagnoses that they have cancer and lymphoma and everything else in the world. And it's just a cute little quirk that happens to everyone because once you get exposed to a lot of information, it's got kind of like a horoscope. You look at little things that do match up, and that creates a new pattern that wasn't there before because you have this new information that is sort of disjointed and you're kind of making it fit wherever. You're not actually being super stringent about it because you are looking for something. As Terry Goodkind wrote in a Sort of Truth series, Wizard's first rule is that people are stupid. What that means is that people will believe what they want to be true and what they're afraid is true. So a lot of times you end up seeing people behave irrationally and believe things that aren't real because they want them to be real or because they're afraid that they're real. So this is one of those things where not only do we easily, a lot of people, 57% of us, very easily take on symptoms that weren't there before and then believe that they're actually coming from within. But it goes further than that. There's a study on failure, and multiple studies, but one in particular, failure to detect mismatch between intention and outcome. So what it was specifically is people justifying to themselves a decision that they didn't make. So they would show two faces, two attractive people to somebody and be like, okay, well, pick which one you would prefer, a blonde and a brunette, and they'd be like, okay, well, pick one that you like better. And they would go through a bunch of those. And then later they would show them not the person that they picked, but the other one that they didn't pick. And people didn't realize that that wasn't the person that they picked simply by being told that this is who you picked before. Why did you do it? The why immediately made them justify the decision that they didn't actually make. So
even just like the pantyhose experiment, right? Like they showed people one at a time, right? One pair of pantyhose at a time and asked them to rate it. And 80% of the people rated the last pair out of 5 that they were shown to be the most high quality. And they gave all kinds of reasons for it, when in reality they were shown the same pair of pantyhose each time.
That's an interesting one.
Oh, they have that with wine too, where experts are told that this is expensive wine versus cheap wine, and it's the same wine, and they will give you all the palate is so much more, and the aftertaste and the bite is.
Was that a thing in Freakonomics? Was it?
I think so, actually.
Yeah, and they had these wine snobs, and they decanted 4 different wines of varying cost into 5 different decanters. Right, so 2 of the decanters had the same wine in it, and all of the wines got completely different reviews from these wine snobs, and including the 2 that were identical, and price had nothing to do with how the wine was rated in terms of quality by the wine snobs. And then when they revealed the the root, right? One of the wine snobs was so infuriated that he stormed out saying, "I have a cold, so you can't expect me to be able to taste this properly."
Oh, of course.
Well, see, the root, once again, we are coming up on sort of digging deeper, and the root, I think, to a lot of these is certainty. Experts, snobs, people who believe with certainty that that is the answer. A lot of times they are the most blind to how their own mind is tricking them.
Or the people who think that they're experts, like the people who have 8 different mental disorders, and therefore they think, oh, well, I'm an old hand at this whole mental illness thing, so of course
While they haven't read a single psychology book, they haven't even tried to look at what's going on, but they have them, so that's enough, right?
Google search various disorder, check symptom list, see if you qualify for a certain number of symptoms, say that you have this disorder. That's generally the list of actions. And then question mark, profit. So there you go.
See, I always not self-identify. I'm my own therapist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I've ever had a problem with someone or something, I've always just sat back, and as worked up as I got about it, I was able to just sit back and be realistic and point out to myself what I did. And it's not that this person is angering me. It's I'm upset because of, whatever the choices that I made didn't end up the way that I wanted to, and I've been that way forever. So God,
the thing is, right, and this is one of the things that drew me into the men's movement, right? Before I even met my partner, in the year that I was, kind of embroiled in a it was a divorce of attrition, where I was like, we need to discuss this, and he was like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to discuss the settlement. So yeah, no, let's put it off more and more and more, right? So it was a really, really stressful time. I was paying my mortgage with my credit card. My fridge was empty. I was substitute teaching at the local high school despite having no credentials, because that was one of the ways that I could earn an extra $100 a day. And on the time, the days when they needed somebody. And so I landed on this men's website. It wasn't a men's rights website. It was kind of like a weird amalgam between men's rights, pickup artists, and the red pill. So it was it was pretty hardcore. It was way more hardcore. They called A Voice for Men pussies, is what I'm getting at. This is back in 2009. So, and they were calling A Voice for Men a bunch of pussies who couldn't fucking tell it like it really is. So that gives you an idea of how hardcore they were. But, one of the main reasons I stuck around was because when your marriage falls apart, I'm almost positive that pretty much everybody can list in minute, minuscule, infinitesimal detail every single wrong thing the other person did, right? Mm-hmm. Every single way that the other person contributed to the breakdown of the marriage, every single way they were in part or in whole to blame, right? But I wanted to try and figure out if there was anything I had done that contributed to the situation, that made things worse, that maybe even made all of that breakdown happen. I wanted to know if I had been responsible for that. I wanted to know, right? And the reason why is because my parents always told me, right, yes, in a perfect world, you should be able to walk down Jasper Avenue buck naked and nobody should rape you and nobody should ever hurt you and all of that stuff. We do not live in a perfect world. Right? And the decisions that you make lead to consequences. And the only person that you can control is yourself. Right? Yeah. And so, even if there is a situation where, where you have a situation where even if one party to the situation is more to blame than you are, right? You still want to look at what you did and how you contributed to that, because you can't control other people, right? You can only control yourself. So not in terms of measuring culpability, not in terms of saying, okay, well, this is, like same thing with, rape and stuff like that, right? Okay, what are the things that I can do to avoid being put in a position where I'm vulnerable to that, right? That doesn't mean that that if I don't do those things, the rapist is not to blame for that, for what he did. No, he's still 100% to blame. I would just like to avoid repeating my mistake in the future, right? And since I'm the only person I can control, that's what I'm going to do. And so I've always taken that approach in my life in terms of situations that ended up poorly, even if I could lay all the blame on the other person. And yes, a significant amount of blame I could lay on my ex. A 100% blame I could lay on the boys who sexually assaulted me. Absolutely 100% on board with that. But what did I do to put myself in that position? What decisions did I make that led me to be vulnerable to that? How did I contribute to my situation where that happened to me, right? That is what I have always focused on, because that's the only thing I can control.
Yeah, we don't live in a vacuum.
If you say that to anybody, though, they're going to get on your ass for being oppressive to the victim, though, of course.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing. You have to take personal responsibility. But yes, it is also a dog whistle for people saying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps when, you have the whole world falling on you. And that's why we need men's fucking rights, because a bunch of assholes are saying, oh, you guys just need to pull yourselves up and go get a job. Fuck that. There is an amount that people need help with. But at the same time, as Karen and Lauren so eloquently pointed out, you put yourself in a situation, you are reacting to something. Life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. You can't discount the 10%. It does happen, but
it all sort of falls into that area where the line is between supporting management and recovery of your disadvantages, whatever they are, versus coddling, wallowing in them. I'm going to take us into the super chats real quick because we have several, and then we can continue with the conversation after the super chats, but I don't want to get too far behind on them. And it's just about 8 o'clock here, so we've been going on for just about an hour. So we have Darth Sonic, who gave us $2 and said, it's Darth Sonic 413, sorry, forgot the number. Said lots of estrogen on screen except Karen, and then tongue sticking out face.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Then we have Darth Sonic 413 gave us another $5 and said, I love how Hannah is sitting imperiously in the center there with a smug look about her, like she's the queen of some lesbian harem. Oh shit, guys. Darth knows.
Hot.
Cheese it! No. Mr. Roboto gave us $2 and said, we men don't get embarrassed, we put it in the ground. And, that's something that I actually kind of noticed. Men have a tendency to, it's not so much that they want to ignore disadvantages as that they want to figure out their ways of overcoming them and move on. Figure out their ways of managing them and move on.
Yeah, I do know, an extremely strong, kind, generous, just fucking incredible person who suffers so goddamn much, but you could never tell because he never lets it out on others. You have no idea what's going on because, well, they never talk about it. But why do they never talk about it? Because, well, a lot of times, as we mentioned in the very beginning, when you have something like PTSD or chronic pain or something that is eating at you every day, and you've done everything that you can, but there's still an issue that can't be fixed, is disorder. What are you going to do? Focus on it? Fuck no. You're going to focus on happiness, on life, on something fucking else, because talking about it, revisiting it, that's just going to make you feel bad.
Well, and you know what else there is too?
Yeah.
There's also the thing where people are saying, oh, men don't express their emotions. Men don't like to talk about these things that are going on for them. And I mean, like, you could say to a certain extent that might be true for some individuals, but what of the men who do express what they're going through, who do talk about their weaknesses, and then they wind up getting
tears.
Exactly. Then they
There's
wind up
rarely
getting
anyone there for them.
brought down for it, right? So it's kind of like, okay, well, we have an incompatibility here. Either we have to accept that men are allowed to have these weaknesses and then to be supported in expressing them, and then we have to get these other people out of here who are saying, oh yeah, men have to express their emotions, but then go on to say the whole male tears thing. It's just
whiny man baby. Whiny
exactly.
man.
It's ridiculous, not productive.
In fact, there's probably, and I know Karen's probably going to be the one to address this, but there's probably an evolutionary basis for it, because in women, vulnerability was the signal for men to come along and take care of them, but in men, vulnerability was the signal for, hey, this
means
guy's
for other
open,
men.
Other
for
men
other men to come and take their shit.
Yeah, other men to come and take their shit, for the woman
just
to
for other men.
leave.
Yeah, not just for other men to take their shit, but for the men in their tribe to kick them out because they weren't useful.
Right.
They weren't like you. When you have all of these physiological, like morphological things that also can be attributed to that, or can be that are supporting evidence for the idea that men don't talk about their vulnerabilities as much as women do, not just because of socialization, but because of genetics, because of sex differences in their physical and psychological phenotypes, right? So you have a situation where the tear ducts at puberty, like, because boys and girls have an equal capacity to cry. Boys are more likely than girls to engage in psychological strategies to distract themselves from what's upsetting them than girls do. They're more likely to do that. But once they hit puberty, right, men's tear ducts become wider and their tear glands become smaller and shriveled up and less productive. So you have to build more tears up as a man before they're going to spill on your cheeks out of those wider ducts, right? And that's all about, the idea of the person in the line of men with spears who bursts into tears and pisses his pants, right, is not just going to be seen as not a good comrade by his peers, right? But he's going to be seen as a point of vulnerability by the enemy. That is where you break the ranks of the enemy, is that guy who's crying and peeing his pants, right? That's where you break the ranks of the enemy and make a space where you can get in and annihilate them all, right? So you're looking at this massive evolutionary pressure on men to not disclose,
be the weakest link,
right?
Distress, to not disclose distress, to not disclose fear, to not disclose grief until it's safe to do so. Everybody was emotionally gripped by that scene in the movie Gladiator. You all know the scene. He rode one horse to death and then got on the other one and rode it the rest of the way. He was riding so fast to get back to his family before they were killed, and he didn't make it in time, and they were crucified and burnt. His wife and son crucified and set on fire by his enemies, and he drops to his knees and he bows over in pain, and he sobs to the point where there's snot pouring out of his nose. Right? This is Russell Crowe, sex symbol, snot pouring out of his nose because he's weeping so hard, right? And he's in such abject agony. Okay? And nobody watching that movie thought he was less of a man for doing that. Nobody. Because, well, hey, if he'd done that when his wife and his kid could still be rescued, then they might have thought differently. But no, it's too late, right? It's done. It's too late. There's nothing he can do about the situation. That's when it's okay for him to break down, for him to grieve, for him to lose control of his bowels, for him to lose control of his emotions. All of that stuff, right, is when there is nothing more he can do to change the situation. And this is one of the things Tom Golden has talked about over and over again with the way men heal and the way they grieve. It is to take action. It is to take an action. It is the quintessential freaking message in that YouTube video. It's not about the nail, right? The difference between men and women. She just wants to complain about how the nail sticking out of her forehead is giving her a headache and snagging her sweaters, and she just wants to vent about it. Stop trying to solve my problems. He's like, let's just get that nail out of there. And she's like, stop trying to solve my problems for me. Stop trying to fix it, right? And he's just like, I don't even understand where you're coming from, because there's a problem. And if you fix the problem, your headaches will go away and your sweaters will no longer be snagged. Right?
Yeah, men are groomed to be generals. And as a general, you need to know when to fight. And when there's nothing can be done, that's when you can grieve.
Well, and then
all generals grieve for their soldiers. That's what a good general is, a good leader. They do grieve for their people. That is a sign of masculinity and a wholesome human. But you need to pick the time when to do it. You can't just fall apart in the middle of everything, because then everybody dies.
Then there's the other end of it. Men who are dysfunctional versus women who are dysfunctional. A woman can be dysfunctional, and like a woman says, oh, I've got multiple personality disorder. And everybody's, oh gosh, that must be so hard for you. I can't imagine living like that. That's horrible. You know, how do you deal with it? And things like that. Man says the same thing, and suddenly it's, oh my gosh, that guy could do anything. He's dangerous. He might kill us all in our sleep and not remember it the next day because it was a different personality. And it doesn't matter whether they're voicing misconceptions about the disorder, or if it's real, or if it's imagined, or any of those things. The primary reaction becomes he's dangerous. And you see that with news stories about people who have gone missing, who have schizophrenia or some other disorder that has, in the public mind, become largely associated with violence. Suddenly, like when it's a woman, it's this person is vulnerable and might freeze to death. When it's a man, it's this person is not being monitored and might, do something to other people. And it's a very different thing, but the same disorder, the same situation. So you have both ends of it. And I'm looking at the reason men they hide their symptoms, the reason men don't necessarily get mental health help, the reason that men don't complain may be both ends of that their vulnerabilities do not elicit sympathy, they elicit being thrown away, and at the same time, their dysfunction does not elicit compassion either. It elicits fear and condemnation and shaming. So they don't really have any way to talk about it when they are experiencing something that sets them apart from other people in a way that is going to be difficult for them, or that makes them basically ill or vulnerable or whatever. They don't have a way to talk about that, because one way or another they face a consequence instead of assistance. I'm going to go on with the next one because we're getting more super chats. The super chats are generating their own super chats. C. Kinzer gave us $5 and said, transitioning as a first option is bizarre. If someone thinks they're Abraham Lincoln, we don't give them a stovepipe hat and a fake beard. There was an episode of The Rifleman in which a guy actually was, he was in that situation. He was if I remember right, he was a Civil War veteran, and they were basically portraying post-trauma, not necessarily post-traumatic stress disorder, but it was after Lincoln's death, and he went around being Abraham Lincoln. And since he wasn't dangerous to everybody, and it was just amusing to everyone, and he was it didn't represent necessarily a vulnerability. He still did everything he was supposed to do. people just tolerated it. It was seen as a quirk. But in reality, I don't know that people would do that. I think in reality, the moment that somebody started doing that, they would turn around and say, well, we got to lock this guy up. But yeah, transitioning as a first option is like open heart surgery because you have high cholesterol, you know, and you might have clogged arteries, but we don't know yet. It's jumping the gun. It's something that you need a lot of evaluation to find out what is going to be the best approach for the individual.
It's even worse than that, because open heart surgery, if you have clogged arteries, is, I mean, like, there's risks there, but it doesn't fundamentally change your physiology. It doesn't make permanent, like you'll have a scar, right? And you'll have clean arteries. There you go.
That depends on the surgery they do, but yeah.
You know, but you look at something like cross-sex hormone therapy at age 13, and particularly, you know, part of me is like, particularly for girls who are more prone to this rapid onset thing, that, you know, you do have a permanent lowering of the voice. If you transition, if you do cross-sex hormone therapy as a boy, you'll grow breasts, your voice will remain the way it is, right? You won't get the broad shoulders, right? But then if in your, you know, after you change your mind, you go on testosterone again, you will get changes in your physiology that you know, like, because masculinizing at puberty is actually more of a physiological change than feminizing at puberty, right? When you feminize at puberty, essentially your face stays relatively the same, your body morphology stays relatively the same, right? You grow breasts, those can be removed, but you don't have skeletal changes, you know, that you do when you transition from female to male. You don't have, you know, permanent things like, you know, your jaw getting bigger, the Adam's apple, the voice change, all of those things, right? Because, and I'm going to say it, women are not exactly adults, not in the same way that men are. Men's transition into adulthood at puberty is much more dramatic than women's is, in terms of their physiological changes. And so it's just like, yeah, no, you don't do something permanent like that. Like, I have to wonder again, like, if somebody had, shut up, Borat, be quiet. If somebody had come up to me at age 7 and said, I think maybe you're actually a boy, like, would I be sitting here with a big, massive freaking scar on my forearm and a malformed, you know, ad hoc freaking penis that somebody built for me with a little hydraulic system in it that I could use to pump an erection by, you know, the hydraulic sacs in my balls, my balls that aren't actually balls, they're just, you know. Would that be where I'm at? I don't, well, I'm pretty sure, because I was like a contrary, ornery kid, probably not, but I can't imagine that there are kids out there, like, especially when you're talking about age 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Kids don't even really recognize gender. Like, they don't recognize it in a abstract way until 3 years old. They start to begin to be able to do that, right? And then for the next few years, they're just figuring it all out, right? And if you introduce this idea that, oh, there's no such thing as a boy and there's no such thing as a girl, and, you know, yes, you have a penis, but you can be a girl, and yes, you have a vagina, but you can be a boy. You know, you can be whatever gender you want. Like, that's untethering them in a way at a point in time when they need to act, when they're when they haven't even figured out what gender is. You're untethering them from the concept of it.
Right? I kind of wonder also if the female tendency for in-group bias might actually be part of the reason why the social contagion of onset or rapid onset gender dysphoria is affecting girls more than boys. They're more likely, I think they're more likely to see, my friends are doing this, so it must be the right thing. I have to do it too, subconsciously or consciously.
It's girls on the autism spectrum for the most part, right? So these are girls that don't fit in easily with other girls, with neurotypical girls, right? And then they are introduced to this thing that purports that it's going to solve all their problems because, hey, you've had a hard time fitting in with girls all your life, right?
Why not just leave girlhood altogether?
Just about, like, and this is like one of the most amazing things too, right? Because if you look at the whole idea of gender feminism, that like, and gender fluidity and those things, that all started with John Money and David Reimer, right? But if you actually look at the concept of hegemonic masculinity, which is where the concept of toxic masculinity was born, right? Stop.
Raywin Connell.
That was Raywin Connell, previously known as R.W. Connell, a male, right? A man, a feminist man. Stop! Oh my God, what the hell? There's nothing even out there.
Right. Connell's writings on gender dysphoria, or on toxic masculinity came about during her experience of gender dysphoria.
Yes, that you know, you have to come to either two conclusions. One of two conclusions. Either Raywin Connell was experiencing gender dysphoria when he wrote. He was he at the time. So he was a woman living in a man's body in the closet, did not fit into the masculine role. Absolutely, it was like the wrong fit for him. And that is when he wrote all of his most influential work on hegemonic masculinity. Or you have to think that Ray R.W. Connell, the man, was so disgusted by masculinity that at age 50 or maybe slightly older, it was late in life, right? He decided he was going to take the drastic step of transitioning to get himself as far away from it as possible, right? And neither one of those things tells me anything about R.W. or Raywin Connell that isn't like indicative of an extreme bias.
All right. It doesn't necessarily make Connell's observations about masculinity or gender dysphoria, for that matter, irrelevant to Connell, but it might make them completely irrelevant to healthy cis men. You know, and that's that's a big difference there.
To society at large. Like one of the things that that Teal Deer did a thing on, everybody should watch his video on it. It was about the Mahalik's conformity to masculine norms inventory scale, right? So you have this Mahalik, this researcher, he developed this inventory that the APA is using in its guidelines for treatment for men and boys, right? So this is what the conformity, these are the masculine norms that society pushes men to conform to, right? Okay, and here's the thing, right? The whole thing was done in a kind of a soundboard session over the course of several months with his graduate students, 9 of them. They were trying to decide what masculine norms were being imposed on all men by white males in particular, right? 3 of the students were white males. 1 was a male of another ethnicity. 5 of them were female. Okay. And they came up with this list of things, and then they tested them through some focus groups that were made up of men and women and stuff, right? And asked, essentially, they just asked, Do you think this is something that men feel pressured to conform to? But what you see with his development in those initial soundboard sessions with his students, right, is that there's one particular item on the inventory called Playboy, right? And when he cited that in his paper, in his peer-reviewed paper on how he came up with this inventory, right, he cited a book that listed Playboy as something that 1% of men consider to be a high priority in terms of their masculine identity. Being a Playboy, being able to sleep around, 1% of men. Now, 30% of men said that being nurturing was high on their priority list of masculinity, and being a faithful partner, 30%. And neither of those things made the inventory.
You would think the 30% one should have.
Yeah, no, but I've told people, it's because nurturing can also be something that women do, and also being a faithful partner is something that is not explicit, explicit masculine, right? No woman wants to be a slut, right? So essentially what you're looking at is, everybody listening should go and listen to Teal Deer's video on the CMNI, and just listen to the fucking, it's just absolute. There's nothing scientific about it whatsoever. It's essentially a straw poll of from a focus group based on hand-picked choices of a group of 5 women and 4 men, 3 of whom were white, as to what the masculine norms white men impose on the rest of all other men are, right? Yeah. It was just like it's fucking insane. It's insane, right? And then Teal Deer goes into the conformity to feminine norms inventory, which was developed a few years later by Mahalik, same guy, right? Developed in a completely different way. The soundboarding sessions, all female.
Of course.
As opposed to majority opposite sex, right? And even the wording of the norms themselves, it was, sexually liberated rather than slut, So yeah, there you go.
It seems like pretty much the full spectrum of feminist research on gender norms and like the not just the social standards, but the way the sexes see themselves, that all seem to be done this way. They all seem to be, somebody like Andrea Dworkin writes a diatribe about how they feel about their gender, or how they feel about other people's reaction to their gender, or how they feel about the opposite sex's behaviors based on their own personal experience with a few people of that sex that they're not happy about, and it becomes feminist dogma regarding the reality of those sexes, those situations, those norms, those characteristics, whatever. And the next thing you know, there's a bunch of research being based off of it, but the research is all, set up to be biased like that. And it's that same House of Cards style of propaganda creation that we described in the feminist advocacy research scam. And I think a lot of this goes back to the feminist advocacy research scam. I'm going to go on to the next super chat. We have Mr. Roboto, who gave us $2 and said, Karen, you should have asked for an easy bake oven.
Oh, I did, and I used it a few times. But I much preferred my creepy crawlers thing.
Yeah, see, I prefer the real
I still remember the theme song to that that toy and
the creepy crawlers. The creepy crawlers. Oh my gosh, we had one of those. And we cleaned up the mold molds, and if I remember right, it was that we had, that we cleaned up the molds and we tried making Jello in them, and we did something, we screwed up somehow. But we decided it would be fun to eat Jello that was shaped like bugs.
Nice.
So I guess we were ahead of our time.
I just remember doing creepy crawlers.
Yeah.
Hot Wheels cars, little dinosaur figurines, and Legos, and yeah.
And see, that's one difference. Like me, I played with everything. I was talking about it in the chat. I had a dollhouse. In fact, I got a dollhouse for Christmas that the neighbor, actually, who was a carpenter, made the dollhouse, and it had plastic windows, like the kind of plastic that you would find over in packaging, like on the front of a figurine box. So it was sort of a harder plastic, but it was very flexible. And we played with that. We used to have these just great, grand battles that would take up entire rooms. We had all of these action figures. My brother had all of the Star Wars guys, and he had all the G.I. Joe guys, and he had all the, like, a bunch of the generic, no-name army guys, and he had the little green army guys and the little gray army guys, and the pro wrestler figurines that came out, and the Masters of the Universe figurines that came out, and then I had a bunch of the little figurines that were female that came out, and I had Barbies, and Barbie was always the 50-foot woman. You put a handkerchief around her for that scene where she grabs a sheet and wears it. And we would just have like these huge wars. We had a game called Crossbows and Catapults that we would get involved in. Those threw little, they had little sandbags, but we put checkers on them and all kinds of other things. And they had little discs too that they could, the crossbows could fire. And we'd shoot at everything. We had the mountain. We had all those kind of little toys. My parents decided they wanted our house to be the place that all the kids in the neighborhood played, because then they would know what we were doing, because we were obnoxious. We did try to blow the dollhouse up. We burned Sergeant Slaughter at the stake in the backyard because we had a whole bunch of him, and the neighborhood stank like burnt plastic for a week. In fact,
nice
vinyl siding will absorb the smell of burnt plastic.
Yes, of course it will.
So the neighbor's house smelled.
What were you thinking?
For a month. But yeah, well, he was bad. He violated the tenets of the tribe then that whose island they had accidentally discovered, and he was burned at the stake. That's what we were thinking. We had a blast. We got in trouble for trying to blow up the dollhouse. Mom found us stuffing little firecrackers and wanted to know where we got them and all kinds of other things. So everybody got in trouble for that one. But I mean, my childhood was an adventure. We had a blast, and like the idea of being limited to one sex's toys or the others, didn't have that. But at the other side of it, I did gravitate toward girlier toys in some areas. My favorite toy, though, wasn't a toy. It was my camera. And all of the stuff that feminists say about gender and toys and everything, my parents tried to get me to play with trucks when I was a little kid, and I did. And then along came my brother, and he played with them better. He played with them more enthusiastically. He played with them more imaginatively. I drove things around in them. He drove things around in them and made sound effects and got so into it that he didn't notice if you came along, walked up behind him, and you were watching him and stuff like that. And there is a difference in the way kids will react to their toys, and it is natural and normal. And there are exceptions. And it's funny that feminists protest against having toys that are gender specific because they claim that puts kids in little boxes that they feel they have to conform to. Because in reality, what they're basically doing by saying, well, if a toy is only girly, then only girls can play with it, and if a toy masculine, that only boys can play with it, they're putting kids in little boxes that they have to conform to. And it's exactly the opposite of what they're claiming to try to achieve. By the way, I never had an easy bake oven because my mom decided as soon as I asked for one, well, you got to learn how to cook. And I was cooking in the kitchen unsupervised by the time I was 12. So, because I asked for it when I was 10. But that was just my house. That was just the way it was. So, on to Hoki Bukisa, who gave us $4.99. It said, having a male mind with a female body is a pretty premium situation. Check your privilege. Well, it depends on whether it's a straight male mind or a gay male mind. Again, if you have a straight male mind in a female body, you might enjoy it. No, seriously though, the thing that we were discussing at that point, I think, was the rapid onset gender dysphoria among teens. And again, I think that situation, it's funny, if you look at gender dysphoria up to the point where that started to happen, you saw a lot more boys transitioning, or a lot more men transitioning, or at least experiencing gender dysphoria than you did girls. And what I was talking about a few minutes ago, when I played with the boys' toys, nobody batted an eye. But when my first little boyfriend played with the girls' toys and wore pink, and
well, then everyone loses their minds.
Oh my God, yeah, there was something wrong with him. And I think that's part of the reason that for the longest time it was mostly trans women and very, very few trans men, because being gender atypical is more obvious when a guy does it, and less accepted, and more likely to result in you feeling dysphoric, because you can't just have some characteristics that are more characteristic of the opposite sex and still be considered masculine, whereas if you're a woman, you can still be considered feminine and be tough and strong and agile and fast and stoic and enjoy things that usually you see men enjoying. You can be completely caught up in men's activities. You can be athletic. You can be interested in mechanical things, all of that, and still be feminine. But if you turn it around and you're interested in all the girls' things, you don't get to be considered masculine. So you find you're more likely to experience dysphoria, I think. Let's see, we have the DCV Titan gave us $5 Canadian and said, have a 5 for the Terry Goodkind reference. Hoki Bukisa gave us $4.99 and said, women talk about their problems because somehow deep inside they know that men will fix it for them. Exactly. Men know they'll get kicked out of the gene pool.
Just real quick, my partner's porn name is Richard Droll, and I'm the mother confessor. So there you go. You're welcome.
There you go. But yeah, that's basically a good short version. Men know they'll get kicked out of the gene pool, and if men talk about their problems, they become a problem. If women talk about their problems, they become a patient.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's kind of the shame of it too, right? Like it's kind of the double-edged sword, because people say, like, look at the most recent APA thing, right? That the guidelines on men and boys, half the time they're talking about men not expressing their emotions. They're talking about the problem with male stoicism, the problem with traditional masculinity, the problem with men this and that. But then you get men trying to behave outside of those ways, and you get people just insulting them all the time. You get man baby, you get male tears, you don't get the right amount of sympathy. So it's really not just one thing, and to behave like it's just one thing, you're missing a large portion of the picture, and it's not doing anybody any justice.
No, I would say male stoicism is almost half a direct result of lack of compassion for men in society.
Well, exactly. Well, I mean, like, that's part of it too, right? But I mean, like, there's also times where male stoicism is a good thing,
Right.
where
Half of
it does.
it's be out of need.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like, just going out of your way to say, "Oh, yes, this is a problem." Well, you're missing a lot of the point. They're trying to simplify it down just to make it sound like it's a male problem, when really it's just a problem with some people using these traits in negative ways. It's not even that stoicism or ambition or anything like that are strictly male traits. They're just traits, and they may be more likely to appear in men or women, but whether you use them to positive ends or negative ends, it has nothing to do with the fact that you're a man or a woman. It's whether you're using them to positive or negative extents, and trying to pin this on men is just really insulting.
It's a really upsetting thing to see. Our society treating courage essentially like it's a bad thing, because stoicism is courage based. It's not, and courage, just for the record, courage is not being unafraid. It's not being fearless. Fearlessness is an entirely different thing, and that can be more dysfunctional. But courage is getting shit done when you're scared, but it has to be done anyway. Courage is what causes people to run into a burning building to save somebody. They know that they're likely to get hurt in there. They know that they're getting damaged by the smoke, and the heat is going to be very uncomfortable at the very least, and may burn them to death too. But they value the person inside, and they want to save that person. That needs done, and so they go in anyway. That's courage. Courage is, I guess, I was in junior high when we read the Red Badge of Courage, and that was kind of the primary lesson that I took from it. Is going into that situation, going forward, even in a war situation where everybody's terrified. Nobody is not scared of fighting. Even people who like to fight are still scared they're going to get hurt. Courage is facing your fear and overcoming it to get shit done. And Stoicism has courage as one of its underlying characteristics. You have something. People aren't stoic without cause, right? To deem that dysfunctional all the time is a terrible disservice to society. Without stoicism, we would not have cities. We would not have utilities. We would not have food as a regular thing in our lives. We would be constantly struggling for it. We wouldn't have any of the conveniences that we have in modern life without stoicism, because we wouldn't have anybody pushing forward when they were afraid of losing everything or getting hurt. We wouldn't have anybody pushing forward when they were afraid of being laughed at, ridiculed, losing their reputation, because they wouldn't have that stoicism. We would have instead the same situation that we had before we started having innovation and invention and so on. You don't have that without courage. So it does bug me when feminists turn around and call stoicism toxic. It's not toxic. It's a tool. It's a characteristic of humanity. And it can be done too much, just like anything else. Overeating is bad, but it doesn't mean having an appetite is bad. And being stoic under the wrong circumstances can have consequences, but it doesn't mean that being stoic under the right circumstances is also bad. And so that's an issue with feminism, and it's an issue with the way that we talk about men's problems and men's issues, that we have this either-or thing with stoicism. And the truth is, it just like with everything else, it's a spectrum. When should we expect men to be stoic? When should we allow men the room to be stoic? And when should we push a little and say, hey, wait a minute, this has to be addressed and you can't just ignore it?
Yeah, exactly. There's got to be a balance. It's not just all one way or all the other way. Yeah. Like a lot of people are trying to simplify it down to these days.
Yeah, my dad 2012, he had a heart attack, his first heart attack. He had his second heart attack in 2014. And 2012, he tried to get through the initial onset, the initial symptoms of his heart attack by taking aspirin. And he had a quintuple bypass. He almost lost my dad in 2012. Like he's always been the get shit done kind of stoic. And that was the first time he had to face, you can't just be stoic in a long time. I think the last time before that was he had his appendix out when he was a kid.
Oh man.
You know, and like this is something you don't. It sounds weird, but I've seen this in my family a lot. And my husband was like that when he had his emergency appendicitis. He didn't go to the hospital until after it had burst, died, necrotized, and begun necrotizing the flesh of his small intestine.
Jeez.
You know, that's stoicism. That's like, so there is times when stoicism can be, he had to go to work, you know. No, he didn't. He had to go to the hospital. Well, there's times when stoicism can be too much. At the same time, you know, you have that situation where stoicism is needed to get somebody out of a burning home, to get yourself out of, you know, you're dealing with oxygen deprivation, and you're dealing with the heat and the smoke and the blindness and the fear. You can't just curl up in a corner. You have to find a way out. And you still have to be stoic. And my own stoicism comes from, if I have an asthma attack and I panic, it makes the attack worse. I'm more likely to suffocate to death if I'm not stoic than I am if I am stoic. That's functional stoicism. So you have both ways. And we can't let feminists tell us it has to be an either or thing. And we can't let feminists tell us that masculine stoicism, where you get up and go to work when you're feeling a little sick, and you support your home and your family, is dysfunctional, because too much of it, when you get up and go to work when your appendix has burst, that's dysfunctional. You know, you got to be able to deal with reality, and not either or. Darth Sonic gave us $5 and said, one thing that annoys me, and apparently BKF, which would be Black Knight Full, are the type that the solution to all of man's problems is to be increased masculinity. I think is to increase masculinity. Darth Sonic goes on, 413, goes on, $5, for $5, and says, that's the only solutions. Even feminists need a sufficiently manly peen, even the lesbians. Political realities, gynocentrism be damned. And I don't, that seems, okay, so that one's 2 of 2. And I would say, feminists claim they're trying to feminize men, but then they turn around and they want men to protect women. So are they?
Yeah, I know. It's like they want to talk. Oh my god!
Kevin says you can't talk, Karen.
Oh my god. Somebody outside is daring to walk on her sidewalk!
Oh my god.
Oh my god, now she's gonna start squeaking. Anyway. Yeah, now she's like wookieing. She's wookieing. Oh.
Your dog is secretly possessed by Marge Simpson.
Oh god. Oh my god. Okay, Jesus Christ, dog. Anyway, where were we? I've lost my train of thought.
Oh, we were talking about. I had said
chivalry. Yeah, no, it's like that conversation that I got into on Twitter like a month ago or something like that, or a few weeks ago, where this, there's these women who are like, we need to train boys not to rape, and we need to train men to intervene when they see a woman who's going to be raped, and all of this stuff. And I'm like, why are you demanding chivalry from men? Like, isn't that supposed to be like counter to your ideology that, like, women don't need men's protection? Women are like perfectly capable of protecting themselves. Isn't that like the whole idea?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't this seem even slightly get out of there?
Yes, it is totally get out of there.
Get out of there.
Doesn't this even seem
And stay out.
slightly paternalistic to you, ladies? I just are women equal, or are they not? And then
they're equal when it's convenient.
Well,
Yeah.
we're all. How difficult, how horrible is it for us? Yeah, it's just so horrible for us to ask men not to rape us all the time. One of them was like, all the time, every day. And I'm like, geez, men are raping you all the time, every day? Like, how the fuck do you do this?
Yeah,
Where
get her to the
exactly
Congo.
are they hanging out?
Oh, no, it doesn't even happen like that in the Congo.
No,
Right?
that's
Yeah,
like, I
no.
wonder what planet they're on.
It might happen all the time, every day, for a period of time while you're tied to a tree because you're a prisoner of fucking war.
Yeah,
And then
Hopefully not.
stops, right? Then when things go back to normal, it stops, right? Like, it's not like your daily freaking experience all through your life, being raped by men all the time, every day. And I'm just blown away by this. And then they're like, well, it's not too much to ask. And it's like, you're literally asking people to intervene.
Right? And you're also
if it's
asking
not
for
too
a
much to
scenario
ask,
that's
if
not
it's-
happening.
If it's not too much to ask, I want you guys to all take air into your lungs. It's very important that you take air into your and you shouldn't be upset that I'm ordering you to take air into your lungs, because that's what everybody should do anyway.
Well,
take air into your lungs, guys, and then breathe it back out. I mean, seriously, what is wrong with you that you would object to me telling you to breathe?
Yeah, well, men are more likely to intervene in any kind of situation like that than women are, for sure, 100%, right?
And they're also not prone naturally to raping people. Don't poop on the carpet, Karen. It's absolutely essential that when you have to go to the bathroom, go use the restroom. Don't poop on the carpet.
Okay, now I have this overwhelming
Don't poop on your principal's lawn either.
Yeah.
to poop on something inappropriate. But
see, exactly.
I don't have a carpet, but on something inappropriate. Maybe on my dog's head.
Your dog's head is totally inappropriate. Noises come out of it right in the wrong part of the conversation.
Oh my God. But no, it's like, it's not even just that, like you're telling men to do something that they already do. It's also that you are expecting men to do something that you're not expecting women to do.
That's
right?
true as well.
They're not expecting women to intervene, and they're also expecting men and men alone to intervene in a situation that is indeed risky. There was a guy in Vancouver, probably 25 years ago, and his name was something, I forget what his first name was. His last name was Venn, Venn, I believe, just because it was just such an unusual last name. And he woke up in the hospital with his face cut up by broken glass, beaten half to death after like a week in a coma. And and with no memory of the event, but the CCTV camera caught the event, and he spotted a man assaulting a woman behind a convenience store, and he intervened, and they both turned on him.
Yeah, and that's in a stranger situation like that, you have no idea what's going to happen if you intervene. I had to explain to my brother when we were in college, I think it was, that he should never, ever, ever intervene in a chick fight. You get a fire extinguisher and turn it on them, or you get a fire hose and turn it on them, or you call the cops if you can wait for the cops, but you don't get in between two participants or more in a chick fight. This was after he came home with his face swelled up like those faces in the video for We Don't Need No Education, because he had stopped one girl from beating another girl into a coma, and the victim that he rescued turned around in her panic and sprayed him full in the face with mace.
Oh, God.
I was like, you should have let her just get her ass kicked.
Here's the thing, though. Like, this wasn't a matter of the woman panicking. No, this was a domestic altercation. This was a domestic violence situation behind the convenience store between
that happens to cops all the time.
Intimate partners. And when he tried to break it up, both of them attacked him.
That happens to the cops all the time. The woman and the neighbors will call the cops. There will be a screaming altercation. They can hear the blows being landed on somebody. He's hitting her, she's hitting him, whatever. More often than not, both. And the cops show up, and they can hear the altercation going on. They knock on the door, somebody answers, or they go in because it sounds like terrible things are happening inside. And they try to calm the woman and take the guy out off the scene. And as soon as they start moving him away from her, the woman will attack. She flips her shit. And this is like, it's common enough that they have to be trained in how to deal with that. Like, it's not just, they learn that in police academy. Because the guy that I went to school with that was in the police academy section when I was in nursing school, he was going through that training, and he was just shocked. He's like, why would they call us if they're going to beat us up when we get there?
Yeah, no, this is one of the most interesting things. Like, my boyfriend, when he was like 18 or something, and he was like a beefy 18-year-old, he played midget AAA hockey and worked out. He's got a natural bodybuilder's body. Like, he just need to work out. He worked at a bakery kneading bread for like 4 months, and then couldn't fit his biceps into the sleeves of his suit jacket, right? So so I mean, like, you're looking at this guy, right? He's not a mouse by any measure, even when he was 18, and he's walking home from work at night and stumbles across a guy smacking his girl around at a bus stop, and so he puts the guy in a headlock, right, and just says, you're gonna stop, right? And the woman starts fucking punching him in the head, saying, "You leave him alone." And he's like, I'm not hurting him. I'm just stopping him from hurting you. You leave him alone. She starts like freaking hitting him and stuff. And then he just freaking let the guy go and put up his hands and said, okay, you guys fucking have at it. I'm done. Right? You're welcome. And walked off.
Yeah. And that's so common. The other one is that they'll hover. They won't move away from the guy. I had a lady come in when I was working at the gas station. I was there in the middle of the night, and it was me and another gal, and one of our coworkers had come in to just visit. There's a guy that was basically prone to insomnia, so he shows up and he's just hanging around, and he turns around and this woman comes in. And she's like, she's got blood on her and everything. And there's two guys come in behind her, And they're like, would you call the cops? We've been trying to get somebody to call. They asked a fast food place to call the cops. I won't name the fast food place. The employees took one look at the scene and refused to get involved. So that meant they wouldn't call the cops. So we called the cops. And I pulled out a chair, the only chair in the entire building from the office, and had this gal sit in the chair. And we looked at her head injury and figured out that it wasn't something we could do anything for, and she was going to have to wait for EMS. And so I kept her inside, and the guy that she had been with, who that was a situation, they were fighting in the car, and her door opened and she hit her head on the ground. She like flopped out, hit her head on the ground. He wanted to come inside, and my coworker kept him outside. She kept trying to go out to him. She kept trying to go out and continue the conflict. Like, in the midst of all this, with a head injury, with her situation, she couldn't walk straight. And I kept trying to keep her talking. She would not leave that guy alone.
Yeah, no, she won't.
And now she had a white knight. And my coworker, this was not a small guy either, like 6'4". His arms were as big as my legs. He looked like he should have been carrying a claymore and wearing a armor and a kilt. Seriously. And he got an inch off of that guy's face and would not move out of that part of that guy's space until the cops showed up. Like, he was like that for probably 45 minutes, because it took the cops 45 minutes to have somebody. This is Dayton, there's always stuff going on, and it took them 45 minutes to have somebody free to deal with the situation, because we did not tell them it was a life-threatening emergency, because there was nobody immediately trying to kill anybody at that point. The ambulance showed up first, but in any case, he literally did not move unless that guy moved. And then he would move to stay in that space, inch off of his nose. And that was how we spent that 45 minutes. Me trying to keep her inside and him keeping the guy outside the whole time. And it was like both ends of it were completely dysfunctional. Here you have a situation. The guy was violent. The woman was violent. And whatever they were arguing about, she got hurt really bad. There wasn't a scratch on him, which was remarkable because she had the nails for it. But there were bruises. But in any case, on his face too, by the way. But in any case, they were both violent. And they both wouldn't calm down. She's badly injured. She's going to get badly injured again if she continues to go out there and mess with him, except that she has this white knight to protect her now. So she wants to go out and mess with him some more. It's just completely stupid.
And codependent and
yeah,
upside down and backwards. Oh, my God.
Yeah. And, of course, the cop shows up. And the guy starts telling his side of the story, and the gal's mother had showed up by then. We let her call her mom, and mom sees the guy talking to the cop, and she practically ran into the store, dragged the girl outside. The cop takes one look at the girl and says, "I see what's going on here. Shut up." Doesn't let the guy say another word. Cuffs him and stuffs him in the back of the car. So that's the situation with domestic violence. Completely dysfunctional, completely one-sided in terms of how people react to it. And since none of us had seen the incident, and the only thing I had that I could tell the cop was that she told me personally that they were hitting each other when he was driving. That's it. That's the only thing I was able to say as a witness. They didn't care. They didn't want to hear from it, from that perspective. And that was the end of that. So there's your gynocentrism for you. Mavis Hill gave us $2 Australian and said stoicism allows critical thinking. Panic doesn't. And that's true too. Crawl Dragon gave us $5 and said Sam didn't cry no matter what he went through until Frodo abandoned him at Shelob's lair. He stopped crying the moment he realized he could help. I have to tell you, my favorite character is Sam. I like, everybody likes Frodo, everybody likes Gandalf, everybody likes Aragorn. My favorite character has always been Sam.
It's always the support characters that carry the plot. And I think that's one valid point that feminism has, if it ever had it, is that we came to a point where we stopped valuing the homemaker role. And feminism might have been the one that started it to begin with.
Yeah,
we stopped valuing the homemaker. We stopped valuing the person who is there bringing you your shoes and a fucking cold drink after a long day of work, because that is the environment where you feel like home. A mother, a supporter. To me, a strong female character isn't somebody who acts like a man and goes out there and kicks ass. It's somebody who is there for you to provide a space, a feeling loved, a feeling cared for, and also growth, nurturing. You need a fertilized, I hate to use the word safe space because it's, a thing that we all talk badly about, but there is, to a certain extent, there is a necessity to have a home. You have to have a place where you feel like, even if you might fight with your siblings or you might, get disciplined, somebody loves you. Fundamentally, at its base, intrinsically, you are loved. And supported.
This is one of the things that really strikes me about, how we look at previous generations. Because there was an article that came out, was based on a book that a historian wrote about Victorian dads, right? And she essentially said that, hey, Sam, can you turn off the oven? Thanks. That the Victorian dad may have been the first generation of the new dad, right? The new nurturing, hands-on involved father, right? Despite the fact that there's this reputation of Victorian dads as being distant and cold and just not home and not involved with their children and all of that, right? And she had looked through a whole bunch of hundreds of primary sources of diaries and memoirs and things of don't bug your dog. She's eating a bone. Well, don't pet her while she's eating a bone. Anyway, don't sit near her while she's eating a bone. Okay. Anyway, so she'd gone through all these diaries and memoirs of mostly working people who grew up working class during the Victorian era. And in one of these anecdotes from this diary, right, and she said there was a clear pattern of just you wait till your father gets home. That dad as cold disciplinarian was a fiction created by mom.
Right?
And that in at least one case, that just you wait till your father gets home, the mother insisted that the father beat the son, and the father took the son into the bedroom, and they conspired with one another, and the father beat the bedpost, and the son cried out as if he was being beaten.
Daddy, no!
Yeah.
See, unfortunately, I had the opposite of that. I did have a grandmother. She's wonderful now, but at the time of me growing up with her, she couldn't really necessarily handle me for whatever reason. And
Beat the shit
could have
out
been
of you?
No. It could have been just resentment that she had to quit school or work early because my mom got pregnant while in medical school with her new husband. I don't know, whatever it was. She couldn't really deal with me the normal way, like grandmothers are supposed to be, like sweet and loving and kind. I never had that. But I did have an amazing grandfather. However, when I got a little bit older, she would basically emotionally berate me all day about how I'm such a pain and I won't nap and I won't do this and I won't do that. And then she would cry to and then my grandfather would come home and then she would cry to him about what a bad day she had with me. And then I'd get.
When well, there you go. But
I'm wondering,
that's
though.
the thing. That's the thing too, right? Is that so much of the pressure put on these men to be disciplinarians was put
by
on
women.
By women. Like my mom.
The problem with it, though, the definition of nurturing there seems to be sitting with the child at home. And I'm wondering if feminists are discounting the ways that men nurture. Who taught the child the family business? Because it used to be
just play by itself is so important.
Who taught the child the family business? Who was the one who got them?
With the kid? Who fought with the kid? Who did rough and tumble play with the kid? Who played catch in the yard with the kid? Who read a bedtime story with the kid?
Who is right now consoling my screaming?
Yeah.
You're on the chat with you guys.
But even before the Victorian era, back before the industrial age, when it was people were tradesmen, or people were worked in other people's houses or whatever, you still had parents had to train their children up to do what the parents did, or had to figure out what ways can I gain an advantage for my child. There were parents that sent their children off to apprentice with people and never saw them again for years, because they wanted to give their child an opportunity to not be as poor as they were when they were raising the child. And there were people who raised their children to be bakers or farriers or anybody that and it was when it came to the trade, or it came to that was the men. That still is nurturing. It's just not feminine nurturing.
But what I'm saying is, from these memoirs, this historian found that these dads were hands-on, affectionate, huggy. They were not just teaching their kids a trade. They were, actively involved in their kids' lives, in terms of affection, tucking them into bed, soothing their, getting up in the night when they had nightmares, all of those things, right? All of those things that we say is that this is the new model dad. No, I think that that's been dads all along.
They always did that, yeah. And it's just, a lot of times I think, though, dads interact with kids differently because of the same thing with respect to how do you deal with adversity. Women complain about it, men take action. Women don't they complain first and maybe take action later if somebody doesn't take action on their behalf.
It might have been having the mother that I did, right, who was not a complainer.
Yeah.
That essentially made me value both roles equally, right?
Well,
that essentially we see them as not so disparate, not so different. My dad was gone from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. every day. Yeah, sure, he was out of the house for that time, but when he got home, he was no different to me in terms of affection or anything like that than my mom was. My mom taught me how to bake bread, and my mom taught me how to butter toast, and my dad taught me how to butter floor tiles.
Yeah. The thing I'm getting at is, in situations where women didn't have an excuse to just complain and not take action, like women who grew up on farms probably are all a lot like your mom. My mom's like that. And she grew up she grew up tossing bales of hay that weighed as much as she did, or more. And wrangling bulls. And so she's an action-based person as well. But in general, women complain first, and then if they have to, they'll take action. Whereas men don't complain first because they know that nobody is going to act on their behalf. They have to do it themselves. And I think that difference creates a difference in the expectation they have for their kids as well. And while men, and the way they react as well. And men are more likely to react to their, if I had a good example, it'd probably be the way my parents dealt with nightmares. I had bizarre nightmares growing up. I still do sometimes. Zombies and everything, right? And so I didn't just have a monster in the closet. I had a highly detailed description of the monster in the closet, what it was doing, what it was going to do, and why I was scared of it. And my father would come in and defeat the monster in the closet by looking in there, taking everything out that he had to take out, moving everything that he had to move, showing that it wasn't there, whatever. Mom's first response was comforting. Do you want a hot drink? Sit here with you and talk about it. And it wasn't like, and then she'd ease me over to let's turn on the lights, let's take a look. But she had to go through that first. And then Dad finally figured out to tell me there isn't anything in the world that's going to be bigger and stronger than I am. So you don't have to be afraid if something's in there. And once we've established that it's not in there, where is it going to come from? And so you used logic. Like, you had two totally different reactions. Yeah, they were both nurturing. Yeah, they were both responding to the same problem. Yeah, they both were patient and dealt with the fact that it was a child making the complaint, but they both handled it very differently from each other. And I think you see that with parents throughout history. And I think women have a tendency to look at the fact that a man nurtures in different methodology, I guess you could say, right? Different means, different choices, different ways, and say, well, that's not nurturing. It's not what I would do. And then you get this myth of the non-nurturing, distant male who doesn't care about your problems.
Yeah, or the hard disciplinarian father, because, like what my mom did a couple of times when we were really, really, really awful as, babies, just like crying all the time and all of that, right? Is sometimes she would greet him at the door when he got home from work and hand him the kid in question and say, take this child before I kill it, right? And just be like, and then just go and have a bath or something, right? Go take 15 minutes for herself while he dealt with it. She never, ever, ever asked him to discipline us.
Yeah, my mom didn't do that either. It was done by the time Dad got home, and if there was any discussion that needed to happen after that, she'd explain to him what was going on. But other than that, it was done, and it was over with, and it was not. Yeah. It didn't need to be talked about any further.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things too. My dad was big on, like the one time, because my dad was very big on like warning me. Right? Warning me in terms of, okay, be careful about this, be careful about that, be careful about this, make sure you drive defensively, all this, right? Particularly when I was a teenager. Right? And there was this one time I drove too fast approaching the low-level bridge in Edmonton, and there's this significant curve with a tall curb, a barricade, concrete barricade there. And I put a quarter-sized scrape in my bumper, the bumper of the car, the family car, rear bumper, because I just lost traction for a second, and the rear end slammed into it. And I was just dying. I was just absolutely dying. And I was like, okay, when he comes home, I have to confess. I have to confess before he notices, because, oh my God, if he notices before I confess, it's just going to be even worse. And oh my God, right? So he comes home from work. He pulls into the driveway. I go and I meet him outside the garage door, right? And I tell him, Dad, I put a scrape on the car today. And he says, oh, what'd you do? I said, well, I was going too fast, approaching the low level bridge, and it was slippery, and I hit the barricade. And he looks at it and he goes, oh, mind that you don't do that again. And then he went inside.
Yeah.
And that was it. Mind that you don't do that again. Like, it's like, because he's like, at that point, he's like, okay, it's done.
There's nothing you can do about it now.
Nothing you can do about it now. No amount of yelling, whatever, right? And he saw that I was like really upset about it, and he's like, well, just don't do it again.
Yeah, you were already remorseful. my dad would ask me occasionally when I had something like that happen, well, what'd you learn? Because if he didn't ask me what I learned, I would forget. I had that habit. Like, I like to refer to it as the school of self-inflicted hard knocks. I learned from mistakes very well, and not so much from thinking ahead of time. So my dad asked me a lot, what'd you learn? And that wasn't so much discipline as, okay, what are you going to do differently next time? And if I had a good answer, that was it. If I didn't have a good answer, then we had to talk about it. But that was it. And two, there was no long drawn out, the only time I had anything long and drawn out was when I broke the neighbor's window climbing the walnut tree that I had been told not to climb because the branches were too small and they wouldn't support my weight. And it was fall, and the walnuts were big and ripe, and it's a black walnut tree, so they have a pulp around them that makes the entire thing the size of about a baseball, and with the hardness of a softball. And I knocked one down, and it hit a branch, and it bounced and ricocheted into the bathroom window, and of all the windows to break, and crash, right? So there had to be a consequence for that one. The neighbor didn't deserve to have his window broken just because I misbehaved, and he didn't deserve to have to pay for a replacement window just because I misbehaved. And if I was an adult, the neighbor could sue me for that, right? So Dad's ruling was that I would have to pay for the window. And since I didn't have a bunch of money to pay for the window, Mom's ruling was that I had to do chores to earn the money to pay for the window. And they would pay for the window, and then I would work it off. And Mom came up with the chores, and she was the one who dealt with the long-term part of that. And my dad still had the same question: what'd you learn? Dad's always right. I learned that Dad's always right.
Not my dad.
No, you learned that when somebody tells you there might be a consequence to this action, you should consider the potential consequence and decide whether the action is worth facing that consequence before you take the action. Dad's not always right.
Yeah, my dad was the exact opposite. My dad was like the best example of how not to be.
Oh boy.
He was very. I always got the impression that my dad was resentful that he had to support a wife and kids. So he was very hands off. Just not a supportive guy. Just didn't anything I wanted to do. He didn't. I was totally sheltered. And my mom was the more nurturing one, and I kind of like rejected it. I don't know why that is. I have that relationship with my mom. Like, she wants to be that nurturing, protective, she wants to be involved in my life. And I'm just like, no, I want to do it myself, So I learned a lot of these things in, a different way. Like I learned them because I had bad examples.
No, and it could work that way too. My dad had examples that he learned, not to be like as well. And I grew up hearing about him. So there is that.
See, my dad was kind of like my island growing up. Like, he was my safe place. He was kind of the one thing that was consistent for me until my stepmother came into the picture, and then things kind of became a little bit tense because obviously she became abusive right after the ring was put on her finger. But up until that point, my dad was kind of my rock, so he was the only one that I could really rely on, because God knows my mom couldn't be trusted to be in the picture. So I don't know, like maybe I think that's one of the reasons why I got into men's issues in the first place, right? Was because I grew up seeing how great men could be and how much they could do for everybody, right? My dad tried so hard to get me everything so that I could have a positive childhood, and I really grew up respecting that, and I've always wanted to support men as a result, just because I had that example. So I don't
Yeah,
know. It's something
yeah,
that I
my-
really appreciated.
I feel that so hard. My grandpa wasn't super, he wasn't like the softest person, but he spent a lot of time with me. He was there for me like men are there for you, as in like he played with me. He kept me company when I was like scared, doing some Russian home remedies under a bunch of blankets in the dark. He like would get in there with me and he would read to me. He'd teach me how to play chess while getting really frustrated about my impatience. So he definitely had a bit of an explosive temper, but you know, I didn't get punished ever unless I lied about something and I said I was going to be somewhere and I wasn't there and they were worried about me and I got some lashings. Or if grandma pulled some shit. So growing up, being treated as, you know, not necessarily a girl and being, you know, on the spectrum somewhat myself, there was that too, where it's like I did have an example of a very good man and how much specifically the discipline aspect of it made me respect him, and that, you know, you have to discipline your children. You can't just flip out when you're emotional because then you have this toxic relationship of wanting to please the person instead of actually realizing what consequences your actions cause, like discipline does when you're younger. And my mom was actually the more masculine one, and my stepdad was the one I learned all my histrionicness from. They're totally different people now. So like I speak about a time and a place that is sort of frozen in time because things are much different now. We have a much better relationship all around. And ever since my baby half sister was born about when I was 18, so like she's 13 now, that really changed my parents as well. But I did observe this dynamic of white knighting on my grandpa's side towards my grandma. But then I also observed her being very negative towards him and his drinking at times and all of that. And I saw how a woman can push a man and push and push and push and push until he like just can't handle it anymore and physically perhaps pushes her back and then is horribly guilty about it. And then everybody jumps on his ass. And then there's just a big issue on that front. And then on my parents' end, my mother was the more masculine-minded one. So I guess I inherited my autism spectrum from her. But no, she was always very cool, very awesome. And I loved my time with her before my stepdad was in the picture or when he was away. I slept in bed with her. I got my mothering from her. She was very busy working 3 jobs trying to keep, you know, things afloat in post-Soviet Moldova, where it hit particularly hard to not have that support of the government beforehand, and just everything fell apart. And so doctors and scientists, like, they didn't have jobs anymore. They had to work, you know, 8 fucking jobs to try to make ends meet. And my grandparents still helped with their farming of food and stuff like that. So it was a particularly negligent sort of childhood, but not because they were mean people. It just was the situation. And whenever I did have my mother, she was, you know, stable, sort of just like my grandfather. It was like a stable place that I felt like good in. But then, of course, there were other issues that actually came from my stepdad. That was, you know, catty and bipolar and, like, you know, things like that. So I basically got a front row seat to unhealthy dynamics between men and women, and how much the masculine is berated or vilified for the outward aggressive expression of something that the feminine has driven it to. And I saw that both in literal men and women, and also the opposite, where, you know, my parents, my stepparents, stepdad and mom also fought a lot growing up. So, but it was completely flipped there. He was the more feminine side and she was the more masculine. And he would push and then she would, like, flip out one big time. And it's just really interesting going back over all those memories and seeing how that informed my view, and also me myself not being treated like a girl all that often. And all of these little dynamics where it's like, so, you know, you can have, it's really just about subtle power and overt power. And the masculine and the feminine don't have to exist within the genders or the sexes that they, you know, were born in. It is a mind type. And so seeing all of that, and then, of course, in high school, I straight up knew people that were like, hey, yeah, I lied about this boy raping me. And then the whole school turned on him and he had nobody and he was all alone while also having a broken home. So, you know, it was just little things like that. And even with all of that, I still learned a lot of negative ways of being from all of those influences in my early childhood. And I was straight up histrionic. I had to overcome it. And once again, it was a leader who is a proper leader, like the alpha male in the apes, that is the true alpha male. Their job is to mitigate conflict impartially and to console. So my partner basically rescued me from the depths of that mental illness by being a stable, loving, masculine force. And what it boils down to a lot is being able to not have hysteria. So, we're right back around to feigning symptoms and having and putting on or allowing oneself to devolve emotionally and to just be at the whim of whatever insane hurricane is going on in your head, instead of being able to step back and sort of like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? I need to and a lot of that comes from that stoicism, comes from, perhaps, Lauren, the reason you are able to sort of step back and to react to things in a way that is timely and proper, and not immediately react, or perhaps the reason you can handle being on your own and wanting to do things on your own, therefore kind of having agency and autonomy over your life. That perhaps was an influence of your father, who was the extreme stoicism, to the point where he didn't even feel comfortable interacting, or didn't want to, or didn't feel comfortable. Because there's also that issue. Like, sometimes interacting intimately with children is also seen as a weakness. We've briefly touched on this, where it's like, you can't ever see a comedian as a president. Like, not actually, because there's this level of respectability that comes along with somebody who is very serious, never plays, is very distant. That is a image we have instinctually as a leader. That's a serious person who can get stuff done. But somebody who's joking and laughing and playing with kids, oh, fuck that. That's some weakling, So there's that whole thing where having even a hyper masculine influence can actually lead to being more healthy humans, because we're able to not just give in to every tiny little emotion and fluctuation that our brain decides to throw at us. And I think that's why fathers, and specifically not just fathers, but masculine presence. That's why masculine presence, I think, is so important.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned a comedian can't be president, because I watched some speech Trump was giving, and I don't remember what he was talking about, but the press had been making fun of him because he's not very presidential. They don't think he's very presidential, right? And so he decided to make fun of their making fun of him. And he got all serious for a minute. I'm very presidential, and he made himself all stiff and stoic and turned left and right and looked around. Look, I'm being presidential, and walked around a little bit, and then went back to his speech. And of course, his audience ate it up. But the folks that do not like him kind of lost their shit over it, because he wasn't serious. And you have to be serious if you're going to be a leader. But that's the same.
Respectable.
Yes, you have to be very presidential. Well, that's the same set of people, though, that use the word power when they are referring to administrative responsibility, and will not acknowledge that social influence is a form of power as well. So they
and don't recognize the responsibility of a leader.
Right. And so they call patriarchy. The patriarchy of feminist imagining is a system in which, how do they put it? It's men. Positions of power are usually dominated by men, and women are largely excluded from it. It's paraphrasing, but that's basically the way they describe their patriarchy narrative. And when they say power, their meaning of the term power is strictly limited to positions of administrative responsibility, not power, not social power and political power and financial power and so on. No, just positions of administrative responsibility, which all have to be full of toxic masculinity by their standards, because, he has to be stoic, right? He has to be serious. You can't have a person in a position of administrative responsibility who makes jokes and who has human interests and human vulnerabilities, because that just makes everybody more vulnerable, right? We have one last super chat. This one's kind of interesting, and I can see where this is coming from, but I'm going to have a question with it. Mavis Hill gave us $5 Australian and said, there is a theory that little girls play Family Dollhouse to learn people manipulation, and boys play G.I. Joes to develop strategic war and protection. Is it true? So,
Yes.
when I was growing up, we had this game. We didn't call it Cowboys and Indians. We didn't call it war. We didn't call it cops and robbers. It was just guns. We just called it guns. We're playing guns.
Awesome.
Everybody had one, right? They were all little plastic and aluminum guns. And there weren't teams. We all just ran around pretending to shoot each other and hiding and arguing over whether the imaginary bullets hit each other. And then you know, if you got hit, you had to fall down and die for 10 seconds, and then you could get up and chase each other. And it was essentially tag where everyone was it. There was no home base, and you didn't touch each other. You just pointed an item at each other and yelled bang, or some of them made noises if you pulled the trigger. And that was it. We had a summertime version of this with water pistols. I actually had a water Uzi back in the 80s.
That sounds awesome.
It was great because it had a little nozzle that, until it broke, you could turn it a little bit and shoot around corners. It was really cool. But we used to play that as well, and like it would encompass like 2 or 3 blocks of a residential area and a park, and we'd run around and shoot each other with water pistols for like 6 hours at a time. And again, it was like tag, where everybody was it, and there was no home base. And what were we trying to learn?
I think it was about how children learn in different games.
Yeah, like sometimes I think kids play just to have fun.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that. I mean, there doesn't have.
I mean, it's all training, honestly. I think one way or another, it's fun. Fun is, I mean, like, why do we eat? Why do we have sex? Why do we do any of that? Because it feels good. Yeah, but why does it feel good? Because it's good for survival. So a lot of these things are, I think, intrinsically tied into our existence on this earth as animals that have to, kill and eat to survive. But we also have to bond and be a force and cooperate to survive. So, there is definitely a delineation in terms of the masculine versus the feminine spectrum, where one leans towards social manipulation, but that's a bad word, manipulation. But anytime you talk to anyone, you are manipulating them with your words. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like, influence is influence; it's a tool. It matters how you use it and what your intent is.
Right.
So I mean, all of it is social manipulation. Yeah, you're basically learning how to nurture, how to take care of humans. I mean, a lot of times it's so weird. I remember doing this as a child too, barely, but watching little girls, how they just lay there, or sit or whatever, and then they have like a doll in their hand or something, and then they just are talking. They're just narrating an entire life, world, whole, like they're not reading anything. They're not really playing. They're just talking. And so that is practice for the social aspect, which women naturally, or the feminine, more feminine minds naturally excel at. They have a specialization towards the people things. And then, of course, we have the more masculine brain, the autism spectrum, same thing. Testosterone is straight up inducing autistic-like qualities. So that is the tools. That is the first fire makers, the first, those who discovered fire. There is actually a connection between autism spectrum and pyromania. So they first discovered fire. They first discovered how to do things with it. And so we have this cooperation of the two halves of our brain. One is, leaning more towards more logical things. The other one leans a little more towards creative things. It's not 1-to-1, but that is a general divide in the brain somewhat. And then, of course, in the spectrum of people, we have those who lean more towards tools and those who lean more towards socialization. And unfortunately, the bigger problem with feminism currently is that, or gynocentrism, not that we can do anything about gynocentrism. So like, whatever, it's always going to be a problem. But when it comes to feminism specifically, what it is doing by allowing women in the workforce, as we mentioned one of the last shows when I was on, that we have a general skewing towards socialization now in all spheres. So merit anywhere and everywhere other than the super dude only jobs like engineering, like, like construction, something that you can't fuck up.
Yeah.
Like those are still dominated by men. But everywhere else, we see the social mind dominating because we have transformed everything into a emotional mental battleground. And sort of that's why we see proliferation of women in studies in colleges and earning more than men, and just in general outperforming men and having more social services like therapy, etc., catered to women, because it is not really so much about women as it is about us allowing this socialization to sort of overtake. It's a delicate balance. I understand how we got here, because we started as, needing to make tools, and we made the tools, and then we created a comfortable civilization for ourselves where a lot of the jobs moved into the mental realm. And that's when the people who are better at mental manipulation excel. And so it's just, a thing that I don't know where I'm going with this, but that's my thoughts on the male female toys thing.
It does make sense. Yeah. I mean, it kind of demonstrates that child's play is sort of their way of feeling out socialization and developing into who they're going to be when they're adults, and how they're going to interact with each other, and how they're going to engage with
finding
the
what
world
they're good
them.
at, and
right, what works and what doesn't work, and so on. So it could, in other words, it could be that little girls play Family Dollhouse to learn people manipulation, and boys play G.I. Joes to develop strategic war and protection. Although I think boys, a lot of times I've noticed boys will do that with strategic board games too. And that was like, you don't see it as much. There's more video game play now. My dad grew up with a game, I think it was just called Combat or Conflict or something like that, and it's not on the market anymore because the pieces were pewter. So there's risk there, and he had that too. He had risk too. But the fact that, those were the games that he chose to play, those were strategy games. Those were all you're pitted against an opponent, and you're figuring out how to take the opponent's pieces out before the opponent takes your pieces out. Chess is probably the oldest of that type of game, but those seem to be the types of game that men are more likely to gravitate to. And like all the boys I grew up with, if we were going to be in the house and we were going to play board games, before we started having video games to play, that was the way it was. It was, we'd all play games where you were competing, pitting yourself against the other player, taking out the other player's pieces, or they were taking out your pieces. We had Monopoly, we had Clue, we had Parcheesi. We were more likely to play those other games, the games where you take out people's pieces. But to go on, we ended up with another super chat. Darth Sonic 413 gave us $10 and said, "Yeah, I absolutely borked the grammar of my last two super chats. I was talking about the sorts that believed that feminism would go away if men just became hyper masculine. Gynocentrism be damned." Well, the one problem is hypermasculinity actually is gynocentric. So if men became...
Amen on that. It's so... That's where white knights come from. They're hyper masculine. That's one thing. Women are crazy, guys are stupid. And what I mean by that is that men underappreciate the amount of mental manipulation that a woman can do. And all they see is the soft, vulnerable, blonde little angel. But they don't pay attention to how vicious her fucking words are, because they're not as good at intuiting emotional and social digs and all the bullshit that she's doing in the mental realm. So yeah, they will absolutely stand up for the women and the children, because that's what good guys do. And so, I mean, hypermasculine people are simple, which is beautiful and good, and we need them. But they do have a deficit in recognizing manipulative people, because they themselves are not very adept at that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good short version and long version there. But yeah, and with hypermasculinity being gynocentric, if men just became hypermasculine, we'd be fucked. We would have in a situation as far as the men's rights movement, in any case, feminism would win. Now if men all turned into John Wayne, you might have a different story. There's the common sense masculinity that has that's kind of a caricature. I mean, John Wayne wasn't there wasn't anything real about that character, but the thing about the character that made him fun to watch was that he didn't put up with women's bullshit. And now if men became that color of hypermasculine, then feminism would be defeated. But we don't actually have that situation yet. They just need to get fed up a little more, I guess. I don't know. There need to be more polyelums in the world in that sense. We need more men who will look at a borderline meltdown and say, that's your opinion, and walk away. Or have fun with that and walk away. Or well, I can't trust you now, and walk away. And that's what's going to take to defend or to defeat feminism. Next we have Master Rogue gave us $5 and said, Prim! Huggy face, heart, smiley face. I missed you so much. Also, any time for Marina, or have you been too busy?
Oh my goodness. As I was just saying in the live show chat here, I haven't had time to have a sip of hot coffee, let alone to do anything like that, I'm afraid. Hopefully things will start to settle down, but I mean, obviously with a newborn who's not even a month old yet, it's pretty tricky. It's gonna have to wait a bit, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's the thing about having a new baby. It's you have a helpless person in your house who can't communicate without screaming, or cooing or giggling or whatever. And it gets both easier and harder as you go, and it's a lot of fun and a lot of work. So
yes, to say the least.
Yep. Going on, we have Darth Sonic gave us $2 more and said, I know, that's why I said Gynocentrism be damned. And I agree, in that, there's Gynocentrism is probably not going to go away anytime soon. But like any other type of, outdated, outmoded, or dysfunctional manifestation of an instinct or attitude or whatever, we can manage it. We have to be aware of it, pay attention to it, recognize that it causes problems in modern society because there are things we're trying to do the way we would do in an ancient society, but we're not under those conditions anymore, and it doesn't fit the conditions we are under. But unfortunately, I guess that's where we are. So, and I think that's it for the super chats. Who is it? Said Navis Hill says Paul Elam has too much balls. There we go.
There's no such thing.
Paul Elam's balls are the Chuck Norris of the men's rights movement. There we go. Yeah. And with that, I will move us into getting ready to end the show. But I know that Anna has some projects. I know Karen has been doing public speaking. I don't know if there's anything that Karen has to shill. I know Prim has been working with Cafe.
I don't have anything to shill.
Okay.
I just need to complain that while I was on, mute, my dogs broke a glass.
Oh, well.
What a glass
Karen
hole.
needs new glasses.
Oh, God. Both of them are glass holes.
Oh, geez. So, the shilling must begin. Tell us about your stuff. Who wants to go first?
Okay,
Anna can go first.
No, our stuff.
Okay.
Our stuff. First thing. ICMI 19, August 16th to 18th in Chicago. super top secret venue and super extremely mondo top secret hotel. You can get us to book accommodations for you for a limited time only until the rooms run out, that we have gotten a block discount for. And super easy to get there from O'Hare Airport, free transportation provided by the hotel. So super convenient. International Hub Airport. I think from Denver, a round trip flight is like less than $100. Holy shit! Get your tickets.
I'll be driving there. Link to that is in the low bar. For anybody listening. Yeah. ICMI 2019.icmi.info. So there's your link. Anna?
ICMI.info will also redirect to
Will
that.
it? Awesome. Okay. Anna, can you talk a little bit about your channel and the projects you're working on?
Yeah, I do have a YouTube channel, believe it or not. It will be to have more stuff on it at some point. Right now, it's mostly a way for us to have our live show for Cherry Stem, which we are continuing to do still, and it is available for free as an audio download, as well as an RSS link to put into your favorite player. And you can find the RSS link in the description on youtube.com/AnnaCherry on the Cherry Stem podcast playlist thing there. And we are working towards getting those Libsyn hosting fees and stuff like that on patreon.com/AnnaCherry to be able to get our Cherry Stem to be on Spotify and all the other places where you can listen to it. And that's our current goal. So we are definitely doing the Cherry Stem show still twice a month, fingers crossed, second and last Monday of every month. And you can always follow and subscribe to the channel to get notifications when we go live, or you guys can join the Discord. Find me on the Honey Badger Discord and inquire how to get in on my Discord. It's free. There are rooms for patrons, etc. But it's just like HBR Discord. It's come in, hang out, get notifications about all the things. And yeah, so just patreon.com/AnnaCherry if you'd like to see and hear more of our sciencey, brainy stuff. But we've definitely calmed down a little bit on the depth of science that we go into, and we generally cover recent events now. So in our third season of Cherry Stem, we've kind of switched things up, made it a little more accessible to the general public. So if you are interested or have enjoyed that, and if you like mental health stuff, we talk about that a lot. It is my degree, so I can't help it. So yeah, that's it. That's it for me.
Alrighty.
Well, I guess for me, I mean, it's not really so much me, but I'm still working with Cafe to get set up with a center for men and families in Calgary. We are still taking donations for that as much as possible, trying to get it all established. We're doing really well in terms of donations, but of course, every little bit helps. So if you would like to support that, I know Patreon is a bit of a dirty dog at the moment, but you can support them at patreon.com/menandfamilies, or if you don't want to use Patreon, you can still support the initiative using their own website. So you can go to equalitycanada.com/donation. And then you can select, I would like to donate to a specific fund, and choose Canadian Centre for Men and Families, Alberta. And that's something that is really important because we're trying to get established shelter, counseling, support services for men in the city of Calgary. Really important thing, really big deal. Working super hard to try and get that open. So yeah, that's that.
Alrighty. And then Lauren, you said you were also going to be, since we were talking about ICMI, you said you were also hoping to be there as well?
Yes, I am excited. I am definitely going to be there. This will be my first one, so yeah, I can't wait for August. So it's going to be a good time.
And then also, I don't know, do you have like anything to promote, a blog, anything you want people to check out?
Well, after that laundry list, no, I don't do shit. Jeez.
Well, you came out with a parody song, didn't you? You and Doc?
Yeah, we did that video, and so I'm looking. Thank you, thank you. I'm looking to do more things like that, so I'm looking for inspiration for videos. I don't want to just sing, but I think I want to do some of that as well. So yeah, I'm in like my creative hive mind right now. So I'm just working and now trying to learn how to set up a YouTube channel. I'm a complete noob at all of this shit. So
Oh,
yeah,
YouTube just made it that much more difficult. I'm
yeah.
gonna say BitChute. Definitely check out BitChute. Whatever you put on YouTube, also put it on BitChute. Put it on Minds. Diversify.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
That's always helpful.
Fast and loose by the seat of my pants, by the skin of my teeth. I have not uploaded any of my YouTube videos anywhere else.
Yeah,
And
not
if
me.
YouTube doesn't like that, they can go they can lick my sweaty butt crack.
Everything I have on YouTube is
I'm
also
sure some
on
of them would
BitChute.
like to do that.
Yeah.
I know that there are some people who would be interested in taking me up on that offer, but I just keep on motoring on in the, I have not made the only accommodation I made in terms of changing how I do things is I deleted my Patreon. I went on to what's its name, Subscribestar, right? And you can find me there, Subscribestar, Girl Writes What. But I won't shill this again. So anyone who hasn't heard this, they will never hear of it. But essentially, I did that not for myself, not because I was worried that I was going to get kicked off, but it was just an act of protest. It was just an act of solidarity with Carl and, other people, Milo, Tommy Robinson, Lauren Southern, various other people who've been kicked off that platform. So that was why I did that. It wasn't necessarily because I thought I was going to be next under the bad hammer. I don't know. Maybe I'm just overconfident. But I've been doing this under my real name for a long time. I've been doing it. I've tilted freaking swords with Mr. Medicare and various other types of, undesirables and deplorables, and had it out with radical feminists and all of that stuff. I've never had, ever since that one freaking day when I had those complaints, those false copyright claims on my channel, I haven't had a single problem anywhere. Not a single complaint on Twitter that came to my attention. Like, never had my account locked. Yeah. Never had any kind of community strike on my videos. Never had nothing.
Well, you walk a particular line, though. Like Lauren was provocative in more ways than one. Before. Right.
I've never even, I've done how many freaking speaking engagements in the same fucking places where there have been these massive freaking protests and pulling of the fire alarms and all that. Nobody's ever protested me. Nothing.
It's because the only people that can attempt to twist your words are people who are really out there in terms of they have no connection with logic. People like We Hunted the Mammoth and Take Down MRAs and those guys that are just like they're nut jobs.
Well, even that, engaging with Karen at all means you have to put on your big boy panties, because Karen deals only in facts, and then you're like, I don't have a single fact prepared. All I had was rhetoric, and this bitch is doing dialectic. I can't handle this.
Right.
But then you have somebody like Lauren who's mostly rhetoric, and they're like, oh fuck, I know how to handle this.
Lauren baits. She deliberately baits. Like half the things that Lauren does.
Does she masturbate?
Well, hopefully.
Often.
Like people who don't, there might be something wrong with them. But in any case, she baits, and that gets her in trouble. And like I've been locked because when people are rude to me, I'm rude back. And that has gotten me in trouble a couple of times, and a lot of the people that have been banned and everything, they stray outside of the basically this is the type of discourse that the forum I am in will tolerate. They stray beyond that. we stray beyond that, and then we get slapped on the wrist, or we get banhammered or whatever, depending on, like, I've only been slapped on the wrist a couple of times, but they have to deal with Karen on an intellectual level because she doesn't stray from that. You know, she'll duke it out, but she dukes it out with her brain entirely, and like that makes a big difference.
It's my brain,
and
it's my brains.
So we have gone from Karen's butt crack to her brain.
My brain,
and it's all delicious, up and down,
all the
top
way,
to bottom,
all the way. And with that, I think we're going to end on Karen's big brain and
my butt crack.
and her butt crack. So thanks everybody for sticking it out for a moderately long sausage. I think we've covered everything. The only thing that we didn't get into, and I don't want to start getting into it now, so I might ask you guys back for another show, is everything we talked about tonight also applies to the feminist toxic masculinity narrative. And how that gets used as, well, we're broken, men are broken, so men do bad things. And when feminist men do bad things, it's because they're broken, not because they're amoral or because, you know, they had bad ideas. So that's, you can let that percolate for a little bit, and I think we might talk about that next week. And all of y'all, if you want to come back and are able to, I would love to have all four of you come on and talk about it again. And once again, thanks for sticking out. Like I said, the moderately long sausage. Thanks to everybody for listening to the moderately long sausage, and in comparison to some of the ones that we have. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night.